the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, this is Talk Drive. I'm Harry Cole of The Sun with you till 7 p.m. Just when you thought it was safe to turn your radio back on, they've let me have another go in the big chair. And what a couple of hours we've got coming up for you. A bombshell Whitehall leak in my own paper this morning. The Sun finally tells us the truth about net zero. Growth hits, soaring debt, rocketing inflation, even the massive risk of a global financial crash. And there, in black and white, in this report right here, written by civil servants, the truth that we always knew, but they always denied, that the poorest in society will be hit the hardest by the drive to go carbon neutral by 2050. We've got the Tories coming out now and saying, oh, we should extend it. They were the ones that implemented it. So we're asking today, is it time to rethink net zero? And she's back for more. Rachel Reeves is expected to announce the largest public spending cuts in a decade next week. But as growth flatlines and tax rises bite, following those welfare cuts, many people are wondering, where's she going to get the money from and who's it going to hurt? We've got Labour, we've got Tories, we've got Reform, we've even got the Greens coming on today. We've got experts, we've got everyone. But I want to hear from you. Give me a call. I'm going to get the number right this week. I promise it is 0344 499 1000. First time they are applauding in the gallery. You can send me a voice note number on the same number, 0344 499 1000. We got it right twice. Or just send me a text. Text the word talk to 87222. Start your text with talk. I want to hear from you. Right, strap in. Here we go. This is the report that has set Westminster alight this morning. It is, it's 19 pages of fairly terrifying doomsday scenarios of our drive to net zero. It was written under the Tories. It's been sat on a presumably dusty shelf somewhere in Whitehall for the last 3 years, until a very concerned citizen passed it to me recently, and it is grim reading. The public spending will be hit, borrowing will go up, debt will soar. Britain's anemic growth means foreign investors aren't interested. And who's going to pick up the tab? Everyone back at home. Listen to what Shadow Business Secretary Andrew Griffiths had to say about our story this morning.
This official government advice blows the true cost of net zero wide open. It shows these policies will hit the poorest the hardest, will cause a massive shock to the economy, destroy growth, and cause trillions of pounds of perfectly good business assets to be written off. Does it regard taking a wrecking ball to the UK economy to be a price worth paying? Labour needs to come clean.
Labour needs to come clean. And Richard Tice, the Reform MP, who will be joining us later in the show, raised this issue in the House of Commons today. He demanded that this report, which, I'm sitting on, they want the government to release it formally to show the public what's going on. And here's what Lucy Powell, with a pretty unfortunate Freudian slip, I'd say, said in response.
We cannot ignore net zero. It's not just important for the climate, but it's absolutely critical to lowering jobs. Lowering bills, creating jobs, creating the energy security that we need. And
if even the ministers can't get it right, lowering jobs. You heard it there from the horse's mouth, and you can read it in The Sun this morning. Let's talk to the Shadow Deputy Business Secretary. I think that's his title. If it's not, I've just promoted him. But Shadow Business Minister Greg Smith, all the way from sunny Buckinghamshire, I believe. Oh, he's in his car. Greg, how are you?
Good afternoon. Great. Very good.
You've had Kemi Badenoch down there today for the local elections launch, I hear. How's this information landed, given that the Tories, when they're in power, presumably knew all this?
Look, I've been a voice that's been pretty sceptic for a long time. I was a rebel on the zero emission vehicle mandate. I voted against that. I've been making the case for why my constituents shouldn't be forced to pay tens of thousands of pounds for heat pumps that will make them colder and poorer, rather than relying on better technologies that are out there, as well as calling for our great innovators to look at things like synthetic fuel. So I've been on this page for a long time, understanding that the cost of net zero is actually unbearable, particularly to the poorest in our society, and is going to cause an economic downturn. Yet at every turn, we hear people like Ed Miliband saying it's essential for growth. But the facts and the words in black and white on the document you've been leaked and published in The Sun this morning proves what we all knew all along.
Well, it's not even that I mean, I think the most terrifying thing about it, Greg, is it's not even that it's suggesting that the poorest are going to be hit. It's the fact they just will not be able to go along with this. Kemi Badenoch has obviously come out this week and suggested that the 2050 target be relaxed. Is that really credible, given that as a minister in the last government, she voted for this?
Well, actually, Kemi was making some warning signs way before she was even a minister, when she was first elected as a member of parliament, as well as actually as business and trade secretary, making certain changes to the approach during her tenure in that role. But now, under new leadership, we accept that we took an absolute thumping last July. There is a reason the public threw us out, and under her new leadership, I think it is incredibly refreshing to hear her look at net zero again, look at the real cost to it, the actual implications of what the United Kingdom can do when you compare us to the rest of the world on this agenda, and reset the dial and look again at something where the British people might actually go with politicians rather than be told what to do by politicians.
Is it credible, though, for the Tories to do such a 180 U-turn on this? They rounded this through the House of Commons with 90 minutes of debate. It was a legacy for Theresa May, plucked off the shelf because she screwed up Brexit so badly. She had nothing on her sort of political headstone to be remembered for. And if there's anything near the doomsday scenarios in this report come being true, she's going to be remembered for more than screwing up Brexit. She's going to be the one that bankrupted this country.
Look, this report is very clear in what it says. It's something that aligns with things that I've been saying for a long time. I wasn't an MP at the time that net zero
I'll give you that one.
was legislated for, so I never went through a voting lobby either way on that. But what is refreshing now is that acknowledgement that we made mistakes in government, and that led to the fact that we had our worst ever result last July, and now we are changing course.
Should the Tories apologise for net zero?
I think there are a number of things that we've got to put our hands up to that led to our catastrophic defeat. And I think things like the ZEV mandate and heat pumps and many elements of net zero fall into that. And that's why Kemi made the speech she did on Tuesday this week. And that's why it's the first big policy area that we are grappling with to come up with a better offer to the British people for the next general election. Is
it heartfelt? Is it heartfelt policy making for a happy Britain, or is it the fact you've got reform breathing down your necks? They're coming for you in the local elections. You're trailing them 5 points in some polls. You're in third place. Is this just you trying to isolate and steal some of Nigel Farage's thunder?
No, I don't think it is. I think it is something that's coming up on the doorsteps a lot. It is something that the people want to talk to us about and challenge us on. But again, as Kemi said in answer to a question at our local government campaign launch this morning, this isn't something that she suddenly plucked out of a hat. This is something that she was talking about before she was a minister, when she was just a backbench member of parliament after 2017, and indeed at certain points during her ministerial career. This isn't something new for her, and under her leadership of the Conservative Party, we are changing course.
How is that changing course going? As I said, you're third in the polls behind a pretty unpopular government, a party with, well, now 4 MPs rather than 5. What have you got to do to turn this around? Because it sounds like you make this big net zero announcement on the day that government do these massive benefit cuts. You're not really cutting through. Is anyone listening to the Conservative Party anymore?
Look, I think it's always going to be a slow road to recovery. When you go down to 121 MPs, as we did last July, the public rightly aren't going to suddenly be interested in what we've got to say overnight.
Less than interested. They want your guts for garters.
Look, there isn't a bit of elastic out there that when Labour become unpopular, it springs back and automatically everyone's vote comes back to us. We've got to re-earn trust. We've got to re-earn, frankly, the right to be even heard again. And incoming leaders of the opposition, it takes them a very long time to make that cut through. I think it took Keir Starmer himself 2-3 years before anyone was really interested in anything he had to say when he became leader of the opposition in 2020. Kemi is doing the right thing. Instead of just coming out with knee-jerk policy reactions left, right and centre.
Well, she kind of has.
She's focusing on resetting the dial, on us going back to core principles and rebuilding a policy base up from those base principles, just as Margaret Thatcher did in the late 1970s.
Is Kemi Badenoch the next Margaret Thatcher? Hand on heart, come on.
Look, Kemi is leading us incredibly well. She is resetting the dial on our policy platform. She is looking at the ways that we can be relevant again to the British people for that 2029 general election.
She's safe until
that takes a long time.
She's safe after the local elections. You get a pasting from Reform, you get a pasting from Labour, you get a pasting from the Liberals. You and your colleagues aren't going to do what you do really well, which is come for another Tory leader?
Look, Harry, you know me. I speak pretty straightforwardly, and these local elections, we are coming off one of our high watermarks. 2021 was a time when we were winning
expectation management, Greg. I thought better than you.
But it's also reality, Harry. It's reality that those local elections were such a high watermark for the Conservative Party that I'll be blunt with you. It is nigh on impossible for us to match the results we got in 2021. We are going to have some difficult results. We're fighting here in Buckinghamshire to hold Buckinghamshire Council. We think it's a council we can hold control of. I was with Paul Bristow earlier, who actually I think has got a great chance of winning the mayoralty of Peterborough and Cambridgeshire. But there are other parts of the country where, yes, Reform are breathing down our necks, Labour are still competitive, the Yellow team are competitive. We've got to go out there and fight for every vote.
It's the turquoise team, I think, that are causing you the most grief, isn't it? No one's ever accused you, Greg, I think, of being a sort of wishy-washy, soft, liberal left Tory. You'd be all right with a nice deal with Nigel and his mates, wouldn't you?
Look, I think if we want to get rid of socialism from this country, there may well be a point where the right of centre parties have to play nicely. I don't think we're at the point of having to negotiate a deal like that at the moment. I very much hope we can have a Conservative victory, but we're a long way off that general election. We've only just started the process.
What does playing
right to be heard?
What does playing nicely look like? Some sort of pact, some sort of non-aggression clause? What you wouldn't stand in some seats, they wouldn't stand in others?
I think it's far too early to say what that looks like in detail, but I think there is going to come a point where the parties on the right of centre look at where things stand ahead of the 2029 general election, and if there is a risk of a continued Labour government, or possibly the worst case scenario, a Labour, Lib Dem, SNP coalition that would almost certainly bring in proportional representation or something like that, and really push the left dial very, very harshly, because let's face it, the Lib Dems are now positioning themselves to the left of Labour. The Orange Book tradition is well and truly dead. Then I think there has to be some sort of deal negotiated out. Exactly what that looks like, far too early to say.
Does your leader know that deep down? Obviously, she can't say it now publicly, but she must look at the same polls we're looking at, the same graphs. You add up Reform, you add up Tories, you've got more voters than Labour there. Without some form of deal, you're looking at another 5 years of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. She must know that.
Britain is not a left-wing country. What we're trying to do at the moment is ensure we've got a policy platform and an offer to the British people that has got to be radically different to the offer that they threw out so comprehensively last July that can get us a majority. We want to form a majority Conservative government. But we've got to look at the facts the closer we get to that general election to see how things are going, to see how the turquoise team are doing compared to us, and take a judgment closer to the time.
Would you serve in a Nigel Farage administration?
It's far too early to say. I'm going all out for a Conservative one.
I'll let you off that one. Greg Smith in sunny Buckingham in a very fetching turquoise gilet, I have to say, as he discusses the turquoise team. Coming up after the break, I'm joined in the studio by two fantastic guests. We've got the Sun's brilliant business editor and her competitive and fierce rival from across the river, all the way from the city, Christian May from City AM. Guys, don't go anywhere. We're going to carry on the conversation very shortly. After this, it's 4:16.
Vladimir Putin has shown over and over again that he uses agreements, talks, to reposition himself, re-equip himself. So we've seen this before, and we've seen this with Ukraine. Assurances were made, agreements were signed between Russia and other countries about protecting the integrity, the independence and the sovereignty of Ukraine, particularly at the point when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons arsenal.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Talk Drive Time. I'm Harry Cole of The Sun. The texts are coming in. They say, hi, Harry, I wouldn't trust either Labour or the Tories to run a raffle. Never mind the greatest country of ours, which was presumably us. They're both absolutely useless and incompetent. Only reform can put the great back into Britain again. Thank you, Terry in Slough. If you want to join the conversation, text TALK 87222. I will read those out with your messages. You can send me a voice note on 0344. I'm going to get it wrong. 0344 499 1000. It's the same number to call in. We'll be taking some calls in a minute, but first, an entire panel of experts. Ashley Armstrong of The Sun, Christian May of City AM. What do you make of this, guys? The truth. Finally, in black and white, net zero is going to hit Sun readers, Talk listeners, Talk viewers hardest. Ashley?
Yeah, I think it kind of puts it in black and white, those fears that everybody has thought. It is such an incredibly ambitious, if not laudably unimaginable, that you're ever going to hit those goals. And the fact is that huge cost that it's going to take and sit at the burden of normal households, normal households who can't afford those heat pumps, normal households who already see their highest electricity bills in the whole of the world, normal households who are seeing inflation going up and also are facing the prospect of possibly working in those industries that are being phased out before time, before maturity.
Well, look across the country. Look at us still making the Dow chemical plants, and then in here it talks about having to retire aeroplanes 30 years early if they're not compatible with net zero friendly fuel. There's £2 trillion of assets around the world that we just have to throw in the bin.
Exactly, and what's weird is that we know that all these things that are seen as the silver bullet for all of these solutions and all those decaying industries aren't ready at anywhere near the level of scale, and we've seen, if you're talking about aviation, that sustainable aviation fuel is nowhere near ready for the type of scale that can kind of go in place. We know that we have nowhere near the charging infrastructure for
and nowhere
EVs.
near the green jobs and the skills and the training.
They're more expensive, and it's fine. I think it's absolutely fine that we're going for a more clean environmental policy, but at the same time, why are we competing in a race that nobody else is running in? Why are we dashing for this 2050?
Christian May, are we shooting ourselves in the foot?
I think we have been for quite a long time. This is, as Ashley says, a country, particularly for business, with the highest energy costs in the world. And I'm speaking to businesses and investors who, when faced with an option as to where they want to build a factory or invest in manufacturing, could be semiconductors, could be something else, they say, well, it will be 4 times more expensive to build something in this country than it is in the US. Yeah. And that's having real-world implications right now. So, yeah, I think this report is fascinating in terms of what this is going to look like if you take it to its logical or illogical conclusion. But the problems are here and now. I think, as in most cases, you just got to follow the money. And if you look at what companies such as BP have done very recently, just a few years ago, Ashley covered this inside and out, BP said, we're going to go all in on net zero, that's the future, and that's where the wind was blowing.
Well, not blowing some days if you look at our wind farms.
And they said we're going to pump tens of billions into investing in renewables, we're going to pull back on oil and gas, that's the future of our business, we're going to be beyond petroleum. Well, hang on a minute, that didn't work out at all. Yeah. And in the most extraordinary corporate U-turn I think either of us have seen in a long time, the new chief exec of BP said to the city a couple of weeks ago, scrap that, we're going back in on oil and gas, because that's where their future is.
The same CEO who, whilst he was CFO, backed the green agenda, but suddenly.
Well, that's the thing. So, is finance and the city and big business, are they being as dishonest? Question for both of you, as the government has basically been, which is slightly head in the sand. La 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 la. We run it. It says in here that basically there are so many assets that they haven't yet really declared will need to be stripped out. That actually they're misleading their shareholders essentially. And when the truth comes out, the share prices go down, and that's when, already our anemic, finances of this country get another hit.
Well, talking to Christian's point, I mean, because BP is just such a classic and crystal clear example, because, what investors were saying was, yes, this is all very nice, but where are the returns? And actually you're going to be shoving loads of money into these green projects, and we don't know when that's going to pay off. And what actually BP's numbers was showing was that it thinks, so one of the biggest oil and gas companies in the world, thinks that over the next 10 years the world is actually going to be using more fossil fuels, not less. So that kind of shows that even they are betting their money, they're betting their entire value on the fact that there's going to be more. And yet, as the UK government thinks that there's going to be less, how does that stack up?
Presumably what happens at some point is, though, that we have to get our checkbooks out as a nation. We can't afford to borrow a huge amount more as it is. Borrowing costs are massively high.
Yeah, and you can't afford,
and investors don't put the money in.
Yeah, and you can't, I mean, maybe if Ed Miliband had come up with this scheme kind of maybe a decade ago when green was still very much in
trendy,
vogue.
cool.
Trendy, and, and there was still...
Huskies,
exactly.
We can do this all day,
And you could do, there were ESG funds kind of cropping up every minute, but actually you're seeing that's already trending off, especially because those the big funds that were writing the checks were mainly built in the US, and they're all now kind of racing back towards the kind of the Trump era of the world. So there isn't going to be as much appetite for investing or writing the check for all of these big infrastructure projects that you might have once had.
Christian, are we going to end up being a cold, shivering island with lots of wind farms and no coal and gas powered electricity and no finance and no investors and
well, I mean, look, I mean that's
Shall I start? Are we at prepper level?
I mean,
have you bought tins?
It's a very, very pessimistic analysis, but it's not a million miles away from where, if we actually did sweat every muscle to hit net zero by 2050, is probably what we would look like. So I don't believe it's going to happen.
So Kemi Badenoch's right to say, slow down.
Absolutely. I think Kemi Badenoch's speech is the most interesting thing she's said since she became leader. Might be the most interesting thing she said ever, actually.
Wow.
Because I think it recognises a moment, and it's not just a case of saying, oh God, we've got to do something because reform are, biting at our heels. Because to give Kemi Badenoch some credit, she has always said, I am going to take a bit of time, I'm going to think about things very carefully, and then I'm going to make an intervention. And this is one where she said, OK, this isn't going to work, so let's stop pretending, because it is an article of faith for so many people, particularly in current government ministerial departments. It's an article of faith. So when you put to them, as you did, this document, when you put to them the analysis from investment banks and economists in the city who have, by the way, crunched these numbers many times over, the government's response will be, this is an essential economic opportunity and the future is net zero. That is an article of faith.
Yeah.
Go on, Ash.
Well, I just think that fundamentally, if you speak to anybody in energy and say, where's the £300 coming from? Where, Ed Miliband's main claim is that this net zero push will reduce bills. How have you come to that number? No one can...
There's not a single thing in this document that suggests that bills are going to get cheaper. It says the opposite. It's going to get more expensive.
Exactly, and I think that it's absolutely fine to go on that path, but you need to bring normal Brits with you, and there is nothing in there that shows that you're going to be helping households out when actually every month and every quarter we're seeing that household bills are going up. Energy price caps going up again. It's not going to be coming down anywhere near what it was 2 years ago.
And also, interest rates stay frozen at 4.5. Yep. It says in here that the fact that interest rates are so high makes it even harder because people haven't got money. They're asking them to spend lots of money. The government haven't got any money to subsidise people. How do you see this playing out? Do you think eventually we see Rachel Reeves, well, not Rachel Reeves, Liz Kendall this week seeking, shaving some money off the benefits bill for $6 billion, and it's going to hit $71 billion next by the end of the decade. There is no money. How do they do it? Do they eventually just say no? Or?
No, I think that they've put too much reputation on it, but as you have written and know so much, they've suddenly got a new, more pressing thing to spend money on, which is defence, right?
Yeah.
And actually the global world, when they're looking at Britain and where they're spending their money, what do they care about? They want to know how the UK is spending on defence, not on the welfare bill. So that is the thing that's going to have to get so much more attention. And I think, whilst the government might be saying the National Wealth Fund should be for, other things, that 8.3 billion that they're spending a year.
Down from 28 billion. Though.
Yeah, but suddenly that's going to have to be more private cash.
Let's talk about our favourite watermelon, who's green on the outside but red on the inside, Ed Miliband. I've been working on that one. I've been waiting to use that for years.
You don't see him much anymore, do you?
We don't, because but he has let it be known, if you a keen student of the papers, he's let it be known that he would resign if they come for his £8 billion. But Rachel Reeves next week, we'll talk about after break, we'll talk about the spring statement, but Rachel Reeves, she's got to be pretty tempted to have a little bit of that, right?
Look, I mean, it's quite extraordinary that the government's going to stretch what it can to find £9 billion additional defence expenditure, and right over here, and they're all looking at it now, is just about the same amount they've given Ed Miliband to run a pretend energy company.
Yeah,
they're going to want
what is it actually doing?
They're going to want it back.
It's got an office in Aberdeen. The CEO, the new CEO, Jürgen Siemens, whatever his name is. What's his name?
Meyer.
Jürgen Meyer from Siemens. That's the guy. We've sparred before over the great issue of our time on Brexit. He's sitting in an office in London recording videos, pretending to be in Aberdeen. What is this actual new Quango, which they promised not to make another Quango? What does it actually do? Can anyone explain it to me? No one can.
They say they're going to, an awful phrase that I hate, they say it's going to crowd in.
Crowd in.
Imagine that, crowd in.
We've got
private sector money.
Greening up comes a lot. Greening up.
Yeah, well, no, I don't think so.
What is it? In one sentence, what's GB Energy News? It's not going to be an energy provider, is it?
It's not going to produce energy. It's going to inspire investment.
It's going to
into a renewable sector.
Are you inspired, Ashley? Are you inspired by GB Energy?
I mean, if it stood for something, if anybody, if even government, if even people in Great British Energy could tell us what it is, then maybe. But no one can.
Keep writing the checks, guys. Stay there. We're going to talk about the spring statement after the break. But let's a couple of texts. Where's the Tory apology? Says Simon, for clearly lying about the cost of net zero. Where's the Tory apology for COVID lockdowns that virtually destroyed the country? I'm not going to read the rest of that, but he doesn't like heat pumps. Thank you, Simon in Devon. Bill says, good afternoon, Harry. This net zero report you have sourced is manna from heaven for the Reform Party. As they say when they power go goodbye to net zero. Great show. Thank you, Bill in Romsey. Oh, and someone's very mean about Greg Smith. Lorraine says, Greg Smith is just another example of a sycophantic politician who's clearly trying to climb the greasy pole. Badenoch's U-turn on net zero is not sincere. Let me know what you think. I need to have the numbers in front of me because I can't remember it yet. Text me 87222 or call in on 0344 499 1000. We will be back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Talk Drive. We are talking net zero, the devastating possible impact on the British economy, leaked government data, watermelons. We got onto watermelons so far. They're, red on the inside, green on the outside. We all know them. Billy is in the west coast of Denmark, I believe. Billy, you there?
How's it going?
Really well. How are you?
Dodging away. I've been in the wind industry for a number of years. And just a quick one, we did a wind farm in Scotland. And every day there was 40 tonnes of diesel delivered just to keep the machines going to build the wind farm. That was just one thing. And the wind farms then, they've got a lot bigger since then. There's between 200 and 400 tonnes of concrete in the ground and 100 tonne of steel. That's before a single tower goes up.
So you've seen it from the other side. You've seen the reality of this.
It's a load of rubbish. And they're on about Britain's a net leader of energy. The UK does not make one single nut, bolt, screw or washer for any wind farm that comes into the UK. It's all Europe and China.
Well, we're about to greenlight another massive North Sea wind farm with Chinese turbines. I read in the Sun. Billy, what are you doing in Denmark? Are you still in the industry?
Yes. Yep. If anyone goes on to Google Earth and look at the port of Esbjerg, it's about 3 miles square and it is full to jam-packed with wind turbine components for the North Sea.
Billy, thank you for calling. I will have a look at that because I am a sort of nerd that was actually going to Google that. If anyone can beat the west coast of Denmark listening to us, do call in on 03444991000. They'll text, same people are texting the same things over and over again. But if you want to text 87222, start your message with talk. I will read it out. Ashley, is it all just completely hypocritical that, as Billy said, tons and tons of concrete and oil and Chinese investment and we're just, people are laughing at us?
Well, I mean, there's that whole debate about everything kind of in that electrification space, whether you're kind of talking about EV cars and kind of the nickel that comes in, the imports and stuff like that. I mean, with wind farms, there was that whole thing as well a few weeks ago about how steel is going to be done. It's a tiny fraction in terms of those turbines. I think the thing is like we have the North Sea. Actually, loads of wind farms can go there.
Yeah.
We're doing all right at that. We can do that and also do the other stuff like, with the Rosebank and Jackdaw kind of court case that's going in about Shell and Equinor.
Well, basically, the government essentially trying to, the courts, it's all caught up in the courts, but the government deciding that they're going to actually, again, turn something off, which they don't need to turn off.
Exactly. And I mean, this is kind of resource that we have, and domestic resource. We're talking so much, and actually, when you talk, the government's policy is energy security. We have this huge resource sitting next to us that we could have, and I'm pretty sure no other country is turning down the opportunity to tap their own resources.
Exactly. Christian, have the sort of common sense brigade just been completely swindled by the green movement, the lefties, and the noise that was made over the last 20 years into this? Because it seems to me like it is completely ill thought out. No one has a plan, and then now people are waking up from the BPs to the cities to finances to people within the civil service who licked me this. Thank you very much. It's a great swindle, right? People have just been conned into what is looking to me like going to be one of the greatest acts of economic self-harm ever.
I think what's happening is it's clear to see.
As the voice of reason, Christian May from City AM.
I tell you what I see, and what's happening is that reality is beginning to assert itself. And as is often the case, it will be politicians who are the last to recognise that.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people in business in the city and finance are recognising this. And I think you have to appreciate that people went along with this for a very long time. And I interviewed Andrew Griffiths a couple of weeks ago. You're speaking to him very shortly. And I put it to him that, the Tories nodded this through, no debate, 2050 target, as you said, Theresa May after a legacy. And his excuse was, and I think this is a direct quote, was basically, well, everyone was saying it. Everyone was doing it. We just went, and I said, well, so it was just collective madness. Is that the defence? And he's sort of said, well, yeah. So he's prepared to row back from it, and I think that's interesting and important.
Yeah.
And I think large parts of the private sector and the public sector have thrown their lot into net zero. Some because of economic interest, because there's an enormous industry around this in every sense of it, from bringing in those Chinese manufactured solar panels through to the consultants and the advisory side of it, and of course an enormous industry that we know well of advising businesses who want to be seen to be engaged in this net zero debate as well.
But how come? No one can give me an answer. Is the Chinese obviously still going big on coal power stations, but they have also gone really long on the green stuff and are now flogging it back to us. The Americans have gone the other way and said, what, screw this, let's keep fracking, drill baby drill, as Trump says. Why has plucky little Britain just been left in the middle, being the ones that are do-gooding and carrying the can for this?
You're right. You just listed through 3 or 4 major and viable energy sources, and there are others through domestic shale and nuclear, of course.
Yeah.
And
well, don't forget old Nick Clegg. It wouldn't come online until... Well, the nuclear power station has to be blocked because it won't come online until 2022.
Absolutely. So
Nick.
Now what you've got there is what's called a sort of basically a sensible energy mix, which is what would be the basis of a sensible energy policy.
Yeah.
You can say that over time, through innovation, through market forces, through technological progress, our emissions will come down. But when you put an arbitrary date on it and you force people into this tunnel, I'm afraid you're going to get stuck, which is basically what's starting to happen.
Keep those texts coming at you. I'll come back to you in a sec. 8722, start your text with talk. Get involved in the conversation. Ashley, we're running out of time for you guys. You've got to go and write the paper, so I need to let you go. You both got papers to get out tomorrow. Let's look ahead to next week. Rachel Reeves, spring statement, definitely don't call it budget. She doesn't like it when you call it budget. We're hearing quite distinctly and clearly there's not going to be any more tax rises, having made the pipsqueak with the 40 billion of them in November.
Is she just going to call them something different, though?
Well, or stealth taxes as well.
Yeah.
Do you think she may freeze... You know, she made a big song and dance at the budget last year in November of unfreezing the income tax thresholds and saying they'll be unfrozen 28, so people will stop being fiscal drag. We can get into it. So fewer people will be paying income tax. That is quite an easy way just to raise billions quickly. What are you hearing what the Treasury might do? Because they can't... You know, with that cabinet of... Well, frankly, pinkos, they're not going to be able to do anywhere near the style of spending cuts that needed to be. And don't forget, these are the people that spent the last 20 years screaming austerity when anyone took a penny off of anyone.
Yeah, I think that fiscal drag, which is quite a complicated...
Fiscal drag, I saw them at Glastonbury.
Yeah, great band. I mean, it is one of those tricky things that kind of people don't understand it until they are almost in it.
Yeah.
And then they're very angry about it. So I think almost you're kind of talking to kind of one section of the population if you're doing that, but it might be an easy way. I think the thing is that the things that she's been pilloried for so much in business, she's also had to tell them, suck it up. You know, that national insurance contributions change, nothing's happening on that. Actually, all of the other things that we've been promising you, that's happening. I mean, but the reason why I kind of say is she's just going to call it something else is because, you know, she's still trotting out the line, no change in national insurance contributions, whereas everybody will tell you that's just been passed on from companies to normal people. So I think it will just be a tax raise, but without calling it a tax raise in some portion.
Christian, what are you hearing? You're a man plugged into the Treasury.
They're absolutely desperate not to do anything that could be seen or characterised as raising direct taxes. And I do think they would be absolutely insane to do. I doubt she'd survive if they did anything as crass as that. But there are other ways, as Ashley said.
But she's
you can change allowances, you can change reliefs, you can change thresholds, so you can raise revenue without anybody saying that's a tax rise. And they're going to have to do something. But I tell you this, though, it is going to be austerity. And I know they're allergic to that word, but if you're talking about government departments with 10-11% cuts, you are talking about austerity.
So the protected departments are defence, obviously defence going up, and the NHS, our dear beloved NHS, will we even, will presumably get another cheque, because that's what they've already spent. The last cheque we gave them in November on the national insurance rises and wage rises already. The national insurance rise hasn't actually even kicked in yet, and it's already having a devastating effect. April the 6th, I think it comes in. So she can't put up direct taxes. She's promised she won't increase borrowing as a percentage of etc. whatever the fiscal rule is. So she's shut off borrowing. What would you do? Both of you.
I mean, never mind what I would do. I tell you, the only thing that would save her is a decent forecast for economic growth.
But it sounds to me like they're not.
But it's not going to happen. And why is it not going to happen? Because they choked it off. They choked it off, first of all, by almost talking the country into a recession in the summer of autumn of last year.
Yeah.
And then they sort of, went to finish the job with a budget that hammered employers and businesses in particular sectors, retail, hospitality.
Big employers.
Bear this in mind, that they have now, with their welfare reform policy, they have a policy there saying you are compelled to go and find work. And with their policies hanging over from the budget, they are making it much, much harder for people to create openings and create jobs. I mean, that is a completely chaotic relationship.
Actually, what you're hearing, so obviously the Treasury is, outsourced pretty much all the decision making to an unelected quango, which apparently the government don't like anymore. But the OBR, they're obviously they sort of give the forecasts and tell them how much money they spend and how much headroom they have. And what are you hearing on what the OBR are going to say? Is it going to be pretty gloomy by all accounts?
No,
she's got no headroom left.
I think she will have just squeaked it.
Just squeaked it.
Yeah, I think the mood music is that she'll be okay, and that's kind of within the headroom. So, like in all these things, you can kind of fudge a few numbers in certain quarters to make it okay. I think there will be a sigh of relief there. I think that actually, going to Christian's point, it's coming down to growth, but everybody is getting very tired of the fact that you can talk about growth till the cows come home.
Yeah.
You have to deliver
it's not a slogan. They bet the house on growth, and it's not coming. Christian, final question for both of you: Will Rachel Reeves still be the Chancellor by this time next year?
Yeah, I expect so. I think it would be such a catastrophic admission of failure to do anything other than to stick with it. But the growth agenda is absolutely everything. And by the way, as important as it is about what does this mean for fiscal headroom on Wednesday of March, it's not as important as the bigger debate, which is that in this country we have not seen an economic growth rate north of 2% since 2010.
Anemic growth.
Along.
Ashley, go and write your column.
Thank you.
Christian, go and get that front page up. Thank you for joining us, both of you, experts all. Coming up after the break, we're going to have a look at our favourite person in the world, Donald Trump. Don't go away.
We have a chancellor who thinks the way you stimulate growth is to simultaneously load £40 billion of taxes on business. You have to get to a point where you have zero emissions in net terms and simultaneously start to slash public spending. If you think that is how to stimulate growth, it's not Rachel from accounts, it's Rachel from the madhouse.
Yeah.
It's Rachel from the loony bin. This is not going to work.
Right.
Vladimir Putin has shown over and over again that he uses agreements, talks, to reposition himself, re-equip himself. So we've seen this before, and we've seen this with Ukraine. Assurances were made, agreements were signed between Russia and other countries about protecting the integrity, the independence and the sovereignty of Ukraine, particularly at the point when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons arsenal.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Talk Drive. I'm Harry Cole of The Sun with you till 7. Now, we're moving on from net zero. Keir Starmer, our dear leader, he's back in action man mode today. He's got his sleeves rolled up. He's been on a nuclear submarine and he's hosting an entire summit of military leaders today. He's calling them the coalition of the willing, those who are going to step up and police a deal in Ukraine, a peace deal that doesn't yet exist. Let's hear what the Prime Minister had to say earlier.
And so today we're looking at plans to keep the sea, the sky and borders safe in Ukraine, working with the Ukrainians, because I'm clear in my mind that if there is a deal, and I hope there is, that we need to do the planning beforehand, not after the deal, which is why I'm pleased that we're able to get to this stage today.
Well, a man who knows about a deal or two and knows about the man in the White House who we are dealing with is our former Trump National Security Advisor, John Bolton. John, thank you for joining us on Talk. You've seen Donald Trump up close. I think the whole world is kind of slightly baffled right now is there some method to the current madness we're seeing?
Well, I think the organizing principle for Trump is that he wants the Nobel Peace Prize. He remembers that Barack Obama got it in his first year in office, 2009, not having done anything because he hadn't been in office long enough to do anything. And even in his first term, Trump wanted the Nobel Peace Prize. So he's working extra hard here. He said during our campaign last fall that the war never would have happened if he had been president. I think he wants it behind him to have closer relations with Putin. But he doesn't know what the stakes are. He doesn't know really what the issues are that divide the countries. He said the war is senseless, said it in the State of the Union message. You know, the Ukrainians don't think the war is senseless. They think they're fighting for their freedom and independence. We fought for our freedom and independence once. We didn't think it was senseless then.
Yeah, and we'll let that one go, John. That was we're kind of over it now. But look, it seems to me that it appears that the president might have bitten off more than he can chew. He said he'd get a deal within a week, 24 hours, he said. We're now months into his presidency, and it doesn't look to me like the Russians are coming to the table in any meaningful sense anytime soon. Obviously, it's not just the president who wants to end the war in Ukraine. He's got sort of political pressure from Congress to sick of writing those checks. Has he bitten off more than he can chew? And will we eventually see him start to tear strips off of Putin in the way that he did to Zelensky in the Oval Office that day?
Well, it's always possible, but I think it's unlikely. The only reason Congress is upset about assistance to Ukraine in the war really is because of Trump. If Trump woke up tomorrow and said, you know, the Ukrainians are right, we've got to resist this unprovoked aggression against an innocent country, the Republicans in Congress would come right along. So the pressure, to the extent there is any, is from Trump himself. He believes that relations between governments are largely determined by the relationships between their leaders. So if he has good relations with Putin, the U.S. has good relations with Russia. If he has bad relations with Zelensky, which he has since the famous perfect phone conversation in 2018 that led to impeachment, they're bad. He trusts Putin. He says, I think Putin wants peace. He told me he did, and I trust him. And, you know, you don't like to get into an argument with your friends. So I think Putin is the one holding the cards, and Zelensky is not at this point.
Well, how do you see it playing out? If you've got your sort of crystal ball out, Putin has basically redesigned his entire economy onto a war footing, so has no real, happy to see the war carry on. Zelensky has obviously been forced into saying he would accept an unconditional ceasefire. The Europeans are scrambling around trying to build peacekeeping force to police a deal that doesn't yet exist. And the American public, I mean, where are they? How do you think this plays out? If the Russians don't come to the table, what options do they have left?
Well, look, Putin's trying to recreate the Russian Empire. He's not going to stop. He needs all of Ukraine in it. He tried once in 2014, didn't get as far as he wanted to, tried in 22, hasn't gotten as far as he wanted to. Even if he had a ceasefire tomorrow, so he could regroup his army, recreate it, basically, he'd come back in some number of years, because you can't have a Russian Empire without Ukraine and Belarus in it. And I think the European planning for a peacekeeping force is very naive at this stage. We don't know, at least on this side of the Atlantic, don't know much about it. But what I've read, Prime Minister Starmer is trying to create a coalition that will oppose breaches of the ceasefire.
Yeah.
In other words, that they are prepared to use force to stop a ceasefire. That means casualties. That means NATO forces fighting Russian forces. A traditional UN peacekeeping force, by contrast, has rules of engagement that allow for the use of force only in self-defense. So they watch breaches of ceasefires. They watch and they report back to UN headquarters. I thought that's where the European model would go. But they're saying they are, at least what we see in the press, they're prepared to fight. Well, how many casualties are they prepared to take?
I think that would be something our listeners and viewers will be most interested to learn of, what right does a Labour politician, once again, to put British boots on the ground in a war that in extremely controversial circumstances. Frankly, though, it does seem to me that the Europeans have slightly woken up to the point the president was making, and in fact that the American taxpayer has subsidised European defence for the last 40 years, well, last 70 years, really, in fact, and there was an element of Europeans freeloading. In a way, them waking up to that is a good thing if the European countries increase their defence spending, right?
Well, they should increase their defense spending. People have tried it for years. I was certainly one of many American diplomats who said that. I think we were firm. I hope we were polite. And basically, a lot of countries in Europe didn't pay any attention. Now Trump has slapped them in the face publicly, and they've said, well, maybe we should take that seriously. I'll just add as a footnote, that's not a good lesson to teach. But in any event, it's more serious than that now. If you listen to what some of the Europeans are saying, the incoming chancellor of Germany says he wants independence from the United States. Kaja Kallas, the foreign affairs spokesman for the European Commission, says they need a new leader of the free world. If you keep talking like that, you're giving Trump a permission slip to withdraw from NATO. He's going to say, look, Europeans want to defend themselves? Fine. Let us know how the next war turns out.
And the only person laughing at that will be the guy in the Kremlin, right?
Look, it was Soviet objective during the Cold War to split the West, and now we're doing it to ourselves. Trump is largely to blame, but your friends on the continent are making it worse as they make these kinds of remarks. I think it's this moment to be very careful about what everybody says.
It's a very chilling warning there, but one I think I probably agree with you. Donald, I know you've got a complicated relationship with the man in the White House. You worked with him, and then obviously you had your fallout, and you've made your views very clear on him. But his defenders, will say that he is playing a larger game here about isolating China, hoping to isolate China and Russia, drive a wedge between them. There's talk that perhaps if Trump can negotiate some sort of peace and deal with the Russians in Ukraine, they will perhaps turn a blind eye to what he wants to do in Iran, which is neutralize that administration or regime, we should really call it. Do you buy that, or is he just sort of floundering?
Well, maybe Trump's supporters will get the Nobel Prize for Literature because it's very interesting fiction. He doesn't think in strategic terms. His backers often say he's playing a complex game of three-dimensional chess. No, he's not. He's playing regular chess, one move at a time, and no further than one move at a time. If the U.S. attacks Iran or Israel attacks Iran, Russia won't be able to do anything about it anyway. This question of what happens in Ukraine is not going to change Russia's growing closeness to China. That's because of Russian weakness. And it's something the Russians themselves, I don't think, understand the full implications of. I'd love to split Russia from China. The U.S. has been trying to split Russia from China since Nixon and Kissinger, and we succeeded for a while. But Russia's becoming more dependent on China, in part because of this war. Ending the war won't allow them to walk away from China. And if people are really thinking that, they're just misunderstanding what's been happening between Moscow and Beijing.
On Iran, though, the president's threatened it before. You've spoken at length. We've spoken before about the regime. We're looking at aircraft carriers and U.S. Navy fleets heading towards that region. Do you think he has plans to meddle there in a way that he doesn't want to meddle in other places in the world?
Well, it's very interesting because a couple of weeks ago he sent a letter to the Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader. It was unclear what the letter said. There was reporting in the last 24 hours here in the U.S. that the letter, based on the reporting, was kind of an ultimatum, which is get your act together and give up nuclear weapons in 2 months or there'll be consequences, which sounds a lot like the kind of letter from George H.W. Bush that Jim Baker took to Geneva and gave to Iraq's Prime Minister Tariq Aziz right before we threw the Iraqis out of Kuwait in 1991. If it's that kind of ultimatum, then whether it's the U.S. or Israel or some combination, if 2 months is really the limit, that clock has started ticking again, if this press report is correct. So we may be closer to military action against Iran's nuclear program than people have realized.
We have conflicting reports across the world's media of how close Iran is to building the bomb. There was that shocking report that they were swapping drone technology with the Russians for nuclear secrets and help and assistance. What's your understanding of how close they are?
Well, I think they're very close. I think they've been violating the 2015 nuclear deal right along. All these reports the International Atomic Energy gives about what amounts of uranium they've enriched are very interesting because the IAEA is only seeing a small piece, I think, of the entire effort. And they've certainly not seen anything on the weaponization aspect, which is critical. It's not just enrichment, it's actually building a nuclear weapon. Israel in October destroyed one of their weaponization sites. There are probably 17 other nuclear sites left, and we know exactly where they are.
Well, that would certainly put a few things in perspective there. John, while I've got you, let's have a little game of sort of predictions. Do you think there will be a viable ceasefire, a viable peace deal before the summer this year in Ukraine?
I think it's very unlikely unless if Trump, as is possible, cuts off, again, military assistance, including intelligence to Ukraine. If the Europeans can't step up and fill that gap, I think Ukraine could be in very difficult circumstance, which is obviously what Trump intends. But even if you had a viable, lasting ceasefire by the summer, I say again, Moscow isn't giving up. This is part of a long-term plan. It may take them a while to regroup their armies. They've got other targets in Central Asia and the Caucasus, maybe Moldova. They'll outflank Ukraine to the west. This isn't going to stop until the regime in Russia changes.
And what about the regime in Iran? What's your hunch and what's your odds on military conflict between, as you say, either America and Israel, or a combination of both, and the Iranians in the coming weeks and months?
Well, I think it'll be a very short conflict. Destroying the nuclear infrastructure shouldn't take more than a week or so. And I think there's already enormous recrimination and finger pointing going on in Iran for the loss of the Assad regime in Syria, for the pounding that Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis have taken. Iran is weakened in the region. And if the nuclear program were taken out, that might lead the people finally to go into the streets and say, you've spent billions on all these projects over decades, out of which we've got nothing. It's time for a change. That's what we need in Iran.
But fairly terrifying prospect there as well. And then just finally, obviously the ceasefire in Gaza has been broken. But you can argue for the toss on whose fault that is until the cows come home, I suspect. The rest of the hostages, it's looking pretty bleak for them. Will there be a new ceasefire in that region?
Well, if I were the government of Israel, I wouldn't agree to another ceasefire. The only conversation I'd have with Hamas is what the dates are for them to surrender, to show all their tunnel infrastructure, to give up all their weapons, and go find another place to live.
John Bolton, always a fascinating, if occasionally terrifying chat. Thank you for joining us. Back after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, welcome back to Talk Drive. I am Harry Cole of The Sun with you for another couple of hours until 7 p.m. We've been talking about net zero. We've been talking about this leaked report showing the doomsday scenarios that could come for the British economy in that rush to go carbon neutral. We've been talking about next week's spring statement, and we even talked reform and the Tories with one of our guests, Greg Smith, who is the Shadow Business Minister, who suggested there could be a pact between Reform and the Tories before the next election. And we are making news because already the Liberal Democrats, I'm reading here, have put out a press release saying that poor Greg, should be sacked for his comments. They sacked for suggesting that there should be that Reform and the Tories should play nicely together. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. They should do a deal. Liberal Democrat Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper, don't you know, said on the very day that Kemi Badenoch launched her campaign, the local Conservative MP for Buckinghamshire has suggested a Conservative pact with Reform. The wheels are already coming off this shambolic Tory local election campaign. You can tell we're well into election season. So should poor old Greg be sacked for saying there should be a deal between Reform and the Tories? I want to hear your views on net zero, that report, what we've been talking to, your fears for next week's spring statement, which Rachel Reeves suggests will have the biggest spending cuts in 10 years. We've got lots of brilliant guests coming up. Back onto that net zero story again in a moment, but I want to hear from you. Give me a call, 330 03 44 499 1000. I was getting good at the number in the first hour, mangled it there. But you can send a text, lots of texts coming in, 87222. Start your message with Talk. I will read it out as long as it's not too rude about me. You're all being very friendly so far. But let's get back to that net zero story we have been talking to. Let's hear from the Shadow Business Secretary, Andrew Griffiths, about revelations in The Sun this morning that GDP could take a massive hit. There could even be a financial crash if we rush to net zero, going carbon neutral by 2050 too quickly. Let's hear what he's had to say.
This official government advice blows the true cost of net zero wide open. It shows these policies will hit the poorest the hardest, will cause a massive shock to the economy, destroy growth, and cause trillions of pounds of perfectly good business assets to be written off. Does it regard taking a wrecking ball to the UK economy to be a price worth paying? Labour needs to come clean.
Labour needs to come clean, says Andrew Griffiths. And let's watch Labour come clean in spectacular fashion, as Richard Tice will be joining us, I think, in the next hour. He raised this issue in the House of Commons today, and here's what Leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell, managed to mangle.
We cannot ignore net zero. It's not just important for the climate, but it's absolutely critical to lowering jobs. Lowering bills, creating jobs, creating the energy security that we need. And
there it is, lowering jobs. The cat is out of the bag. Now, net zero has become a political talking point in Westminster since Kemi Badenoch. Well, it's been a political talking point for a while, but this week Kemi Badenoch said 2050 ain't going to happen. It's too hard. It's too complicated, even though the Tories were the ones that implemented it. And we should slow down. Now, someone I don't think, I suspect, will agree with that is Baroness Bennett, the former leader of the Green Party. Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle is joining us now. Lovely to see you, Baroness.
It's absolutely lovely to be with you.
2050, doomed. What do you reckon?
Well, I think I want to start by thanking The Sun for highlighting an issue that the Green Party's been talking about for well over a decade, which is if we look at what there hasn't always been entirely accurate reflections of what this report says, or indeed what you've reported in The Sun. It says that poor planning for going carbon neutral could potentially destabilise the financial system. Now, that's something that actually we go back to the Carbon Tracker Initiative in 2011 identified the carbon bubble, that if you keep spending money on carbon high carbon infrastructure, then that ends up stranded, and the investors don't get their money back. Companies go broke.
Yeah.
Caroline Lucas, the Green MP, actually secured a debate on this in the House of Commons in 2012. So what this is doing is saying, if it's not properly planned, if it's not set out, if we keep spending money subsidising fossil fuel installations, if we keep heading in that direction and not steadily head towards net zero as we need to do, which will of course give everyone warm, comfortable, affordable to heat homes, will clean up our air, will improve all of our lives. If we don't do that steadily, then there is a big financial risk, and that's what the Green Party has always been saying.
It's one thing having a warm, comfortable, well-insulated home, but if it's at the price of essentially bankrupting the country, which these warnings are saying that going too fast, with it, as you rightly say, without the correct planning, even if you did all that, the inward investment into this country isn't going to be enough. Taxes are already at record highs, and we're already borrowing far too much money that is sustainable in the long term. Is this not a race to net zero for the sake of a race to net zero and the benefits of it, but at the cost of ruining the country in other ways?
Well, no, I think what this report says is not to talk about going too fast. It's going without adequate planning and planning in the right way. So, for example, what I would criticise the Labor government about is the idea of carbon capture and storage, which is a unproven technology, a technology that's failing around the world. They're going for new nuclear, which is both massively expensive and really uncertain and really slow. We should be seeing much more focus, first of all, on those warm, comfortable, affordable to heat homes to cut everyone's energy bills. That, the cleanest, greenest energy you can possibly have, and the cheapest, is the energy you don't need to use. The government's not doing nearly enough on that. And they're continuing to subsidise fossil fuels to...
Well, come on, if we're talking about subsidies, though... If we're talking about the subsidies, vast amounts of these wind farms have been subsidised, vast amounts of these green energy projects have. Heat pumps are only affordable to anywhere near the levels that people will need to without massive subsidies. Everything's going to need to be... You can't just have a go at just the oil companies for having subsidies when they're the ones keeping the lights on.
Increasingly, what we've just seen is a changeover from renewables, and now what is keeping the lights on more and more every year.
Because shut down all the power stations.
And it is also the cheaper option. What's really expensive? What's seen our energy bills rise up, and this has been very obvious. When did energy bills leap up? When did electricity bills leap up? It was when Russia invaded Ukraine, and that was because of the price of gas. The problem is the fossil fuels. That's what's keeping the prices high. And if we get away from the fossil fuels on a steady, planned moving towards the renewables, moving towards the energy conservation, that is actually how we get everyone having a situation that's both affordable, an affordable life. And, this also means things like, we've just seen the government actually put up bus fares by 50%, the cap on bus fares going from £2 to £3. Some of the poorest people, rely on buses to get around, rely on buses to get to work. Those are crucial spendings. Let's subsidise the buses instead of subsidising BP and Shell.
Buses are pretty subsidised already, but there is a really interesting line in this report that I just want to read to you, Baroness, which is you can agree with the principles of net zero. You can agree that we need to do it, and the science argument is almost a fringe argument now around it, that we are going to be transitioning to a greener economy. Whether you do it by 2050 remains to be, it's for some debate. But for some people, the poorest people in society, this report says it's questionable whether the less well-off households will be willing or able, even if they wanted to go along with this, they would not be able to forego the amount of consumption of various things they need in order to transition. It's not that they won't want to do it, they just can't.
Well, that's why we need to have the subsidies and support rather than going to big multinational oil companies and gas companies, going into communities so that we actually have. I mean, Kirklees, well over a decade ago, they went street to street in insulated homes and slashed people's bills. So we need to have those kind of government schemes to support people, so that then their bills go right down. Put solar panels on people's roofs, put batteries in their kitchens, and essentially their energy bills go to practically zero. So what would you cut in terms of current public spending? It says that massive amounts of public spending is going to be needed to subsidise the transition. What would you be cutting now? Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, says we can't borrow any more money. We can't, the state already needs to be cut. Welfare needs to be cut. Defence spending needs to go up. What would you do? What would you be cutting right now? Where would you be getting this money from to divert it into, as you said, heat pumps and solar panels on people's roofs? Well, Harry, I'm sure you're aware that the Green Party's long been championing a wealth tax. Indeed, I've been talking about it. We've been talking about it a lot this week.
How are you going to get the foreign investment into this country that we desperately need to fund all of these green renewable projects if you scare off every single foreign investor by taxing them to their pipsqueak?
Well, what we've got at the moment is a situation with with the benefit cuts, we're seeing the government raising about a quarter amount of money that a wealth tax of 2% on people who have more than £10 million worth of wealth. Instead of making the poorest in society pay into the government or lose essential money that they need to support themselves, you have a wealth tax, so the people who've got the broader shoulders actually bear the weight of the things that we need that makes everyone else's life better. And, if we have public transport, if we have strong support for active transport, walking and cycling, they clean up the air and everybody benefits from the cleaner air. It doesn't matter what your income is. If you're not, your child's not getting asthma, you're not getting lung disease because your air's cleaner, then that's a win-win all round.
Baroness Bennett, we saw a picture of Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, today on one of our nuclear submarines. A lot of investment required to renew those. Would you get rid of them in this time of heightened uncertainty around the world?
Absolutely. I mean, I
was
actually
really
in
with
Ukraine.
that madman in the White House and another one in the Kremlin. You'd think this is a good time for us to be, going unilaterally giving up our weapons.
You're being more realistic and calling a Trump in a way that I'm afraid our government's not being very realistic about. But what will make us more secure? We do need to look at defence spending and what kind of defence items we can actually use. We need to look at spending on diplomacy and spending on international development. Those three Ds.
You still get rid of our nuclear arsenal at this time.
Secure world.
You get rid of our nuclear arsenal right now.
Yep.
Oh dear. All right, I'm going to get some calls. Baroness Bennett, former Green Party leader and unilateral disarming Green supporter. Thank you for joining us on Talk. Right, who have we got? I think we've got some calls coming in. We've got some texts. We've got Harry. How many wind turbines and solar panels did we manufacture in the UK last year? Green jobs aren't happening. Enjoying the show. Thanks, Bill. I don't know where you are, Bill, but thank you. And we've got some callers coming in. We've got Vernon. Are you there, Vernon?
Dear God, Harry, where do I start? I have a number of points.
Go on.
John Bolton, the arrogancy of Americans. We are in this trouble because of them. Regime change. Who do they think they are? They got rid of a government in Ukraine that caused Putin to eventually invade Ukraine. They are the cancer in this world, America. They are behind everything bad in the world, I'm afraid.
You could make that case, I suppose, 20 years ago, but really, are you not slightly more threatened by the Kremlin and the vast expansion of the Russians?
No.
No?
No, not at all, Harry. Who's caused the war in Ukraine? Please.
Well, I'd say Vladimir Putin, but I reckon you're going to blame NATO, right?
No, I'm not blaming NATO. I blame United States of America and their meddling. They removed an elected government from Ukraine.
What's the While I got you though, what's your views on the net zero stuff?
Oh, it's for the birds. I work in the automotive industry. Electric cars are the future. No, they're not. Nobody wants them.
All right.
They are an economic disaster to this country.
Vernon, thanks for calling. Thanks for listening. We've got Georgina in London.
Good afternoon, Harry from The Sun.
Hello.
I agree that it is net zero suicide. That's exactly what it is, and it's going to take our economy and the poorest in society with it. I've never understood why we were throwing good money after bad on a net zero impossible ideology policy that is never going to work. The government will never admit or take responsibility for leading us up the garden path on this one. And as far as getting an apology is concerned, we'll have to wait about as long as it takes for hell to freeze over. They are a bunch of pathological liars. I also want to know, and you can probably tell me because you seem to know a lot about everything.
Oh, bless you.
When Ed Miliband got his PhD in environmental sciences to have the authority to dictate to the populace how we are to heat our homes and which cars we are allowed to drive. This ridiculous notion has helped bring this country to its knees by a government who can't even define a male from a female. It's absolutely preposterous.
I suppose you didn't vote Labour then?
Absolutely not. And I don't read The Sun either.
Oh, well, I recommend it. It's I think you'd enjoy it. Georgina in London, thank you for calling. if you want to join the conversation, and I'd be nice as I was to those two there. 03444 999 is the number to get your calls in. You can text me on 87222. Start your word with talk. We'll have more calls, we'll have more guests, we'll have more harmony after this.
We have a chancellor who thinks the way you stimulate growth is to simultaneously load £40 billion of taxes on business. You have to get to a point where you have zero emissions in net terms and simultaneously start to slash public spending. If you think that is how to stimulate growth, it's not Rachel from accounts, it's Rachel from the madhouse.
Yeah.
It's Rachel from the loony bin. This is not going to work.
Right.
Vladimir Putin has shown over and over again that he uses agreements, talks, to reposition himself, re-equip himself. So we've seen this before, and we've seen this with Ukraine. Assurances were made, agreements were signed between Russia and other.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Talk Drive. I'm Harry Cole of The Sun. Well, the texts are coming in. Baroness Bennett is wrong, says Nikki. The biggest cost is renewables. If anyone is in any doubt that net zero will be bankrupt and the country will lead to blackouts, I would encourage them to watch, look it up on the internet. A rival documentary. You didn't get to the end of that text. Look, lots of texts coming in, all about that net zero report we've been talking about. But there's another story today which I want to focus on briefly. The fact that criminals can self-identify their gender, as the government won't now force police to record their biological sex. This is happening in the NHS as well. Across the public sector, you're essentially allowed to say, put down your gender, rather than the sex you were born with. It's led to various incorrect police data collection or NHS missed appointments, all sorts of things. There's been a review of this. The last Tory government launched a review into it. The report came back and said it should just say you have to be able to only report your sex rather than your gender of many of them. Now, this has caused a bit of a rout. We've, I think, got Fiona McKenna, from the Director of Campaigns for Sex Matters, with us. Hello, Fiona. Thanks for joining us. You can probably explain the concerns around this story better than I can, but from where I'm sitting, it looks slightly mad that Yvette Cooper essentially won't change the rules, and anyone's allowed to put any gender they want down willy-nilly.
Well, this is a row that's been going on for years. Activists have called out that police are recording rapists as women, for example. We see news headlines in the papers and on TV saying woman exposes herself in car park, things that, quite frankly, women never do. Many people have tried to persuade the police that this is nonsense. They're messing up public understanding. They're putting people at risk. Just this week, Surrey police are looking for someone who didn't turn up in court and saying they're looking for a woman, and it's very clear from the picture it's a man. So that's the problem with policing. And then, of course, you've got the fact that people can call themselves a woman, and even though they're male, they can do intimate searches on women. So it's an absolute mess. That's just the justice part of it. Then you've got the healthcare part, which you've already mentioned, where children are being recorded as the wrong sex, and that puts them in danger. So there really is a huge mess here. It would be lovely to see this start to be cleaned up.
Well, Downing Street said this morning, when they were asked about this, the Prime Minister's official spokesman said, common sense should be applied. But it's pretty clear from where I'm sitting that common sense is not being applied. And is it your view that without regulation or direct instruction from the Home Office or from the Secretary of State for Health or whoever it may be, or Parliament if they have to, is it your view that using common sense is just, it's for the birds, and actually the law needs to change, or the government need to actually clamp down on this?
Well, just this afternoon, the Secretary of State for Health has come out and said that he will order that the practice of changing the sex marker on children's health records will end. But, the CAS review a year ago said that needed to happen in order to protect those children. So I don't know what it will take to make people stop really pandering to the idea that, if you feel like the other sex, that's the most important thing. People's feelings matter, but people's reality matters more, especially to the rest of us. So what will it take? The police were told by the previous Home Secretary to stop recording rapists as women, but they're still doing it. I think we really need to see some leadership from the Home Secretary on this.
Do you think this government has what it takes? You mentioned the previous government, who obviously they came down very hard on the Gender Recognition Act in Scotland. They stopped the Scottish government from basically essentially being able to change your gender with the flick of a pen rather than any evidence. They obviously launched the CAS review. Wes Streeting, you highlight there the Health Secretary as a sort of ally of this movement. But do you have confidence that Keir Starmer, who's obviously been on a bit of a journey on this one, is the Prime Minister to do this?
Well, we'll have to wait and see, won't we? I mean, there's clear direction from the Sullivan Review. It confirms everything that's gone before, that says that sex is a fundamental fact of reality about all of us. We can always tell what sex someone is. It doesn't kid anyone to pretend that a rapist is a woman, or that a girl in hospital is really a boy. It doesn't do any good. So I think it's high time that this were sorted, and public opinion is with us on this one. Maybe that will be the thing that gives the Prime Minister some confidence to step up and state clearly that we must record sex accurately in all the places where sex matters.
Your campaign's been going for many years. It does feel to me like the back end of the last government, and perhaps not. When the CAS review into obviously the NHS treatment of transgender children, it felt like the sort of tide was turning. You said it's high time for a proper debate and a proper movement on this. In the last few months, it feels like it's been slightly going backwards. Where do you see this long campaign you've been fighting? But if you look across to America, obviously the arrival of Donald Trump, there've been a whole load of executive orders on transgenders in the military, on DEI targets within the American state. You mentioned public opinion here being on the turn, but yet it seems the British state is almost stuck in a few years behind on this. Is that fair?
Well, I think maybe what's happened is that it's now becoming something we're all able to talk about, and that's why it seems to be going backwards. But the reality is, I think we're making progress. When we look at the data, the public opinion surveys show year after year, more and more people are starting to understand that indulging other people's beliefs about their gender identity being more important than their sex is harmful to many people, including to those people themselves. And so I think we're now hearing about these issues, and that is a sign of progress. We're seeing court cases too, like the nurses who've been made to change with a man in their changing rooms because he says he's a woman. So the fact we're airing the issues is a big step forward.
Big step forward is, well, good. Listen, thank you for joining us, Fiona. A fascinating campaign, fascinating story, and, another one of those ones that kind of makes you want to bang your head against the desk. I'm not going to do that because I'm on camera. But the texts are coming in. Hi, Harry, Jez, Joanna in Salisbury. Net zero is balmy. What muppet spends a fortune producing unreliable energy but then has to pay and turn it off because they have the infrastructure in place to use it? Ed Miliband doesn't know what he's doing. Andrew says, talk, great show, Harry. You're a breath of fresh air. You and the Sun and the talk are the real opposition of this country. I'm going to print that out and put it on my business card. The real opposition of this country. Don't go anywhere. Lots more to discuss. We have got poor old Greg Smith, the Tory minister, who's now been facing calls to be fired for the interview that he did on this show just about an hour ago now. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about net zero some more. We'll talk about, those terrifying threats from almost World War III and war with Iran from John Bolton. Lots more coming up. It's 17:27. Don't go away.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Harry Cole here on Talk Drive. And what a show we're having. So, at the top of the show, we had Greg Smith, the Tory shadow business minister. Now, he was talking about reform. Kemi Badenoch has been in his constituency this morning in Buckinghamshire, launching the Tories' local election campaign. And we just got chatting, as you often do with anyone in reform or anyone in the Tory party these days, about the prospects of whether the Tories should do a deal with reform. Listen to what Greg said.
I think it's far too early to say what that looks like in detail, but I think there is going to come a point where the parties on the right of centre look at where things stand ahead of the 2029 general election, and if there is a risk of a continued Labour government, or possibly the worst case scenario, a Labour, Lib Dem, SNP coalition that would almost certainly bring in proportional representation or something like that, and really push the left dial very, very harshly, because let's face it, the Lib Dems are now positioning themselves to the left of Labour. The Orange Book tradition is well and truly dead. Then I think there has to be some sort of deal negotiated out. Exactly what that looks like, far too early to say.
Does your leader know that deep down. Obviously, she can't say it now publicly, but she must look at the same polls we're looking at, the same graphs. You add up Reform, you add up Tories, you've got more voters than Labour there. Without some form of deal, you're looking at another 5 years of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. She must know that.
Britain is not a left-wing country. What we're trying to do at the moment is ensure we've got a policy platform and an offer to the British people that has got to be radically different to the offer that they threw out so comprehensively last July that can get us a majority. We want to form a majority Conservative government. But we've got to look at the facts the closer we get to that general election to see how things are going, to see how the turquoise team are doing compared to us, and take a judgment closer to the time.
Would you serve in a Nigel Farage administration?
It's far too early to say. I'm going all out for a Conservative one.
Well, there you have Greg Smith not ruling out even serving in a Nigel Farage administration, and a serving member of the Tory front bench, going way further than I can recall of any other of his colleagues, in suggesting and saying, basically quite a bit out loud, that there's going to have to be some form of pact between Reform and the Tories unless they want another 5 years of Keir Starmer and Labour. Well, the Lib Dems have leapt on this. Liberal Democrat Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper has issued a rather frantic press release, I have to say, given we're still on the air. On the very day that Kemi Badenoch launches her campaign in Buckinghamshire, the local Conservative MP has suggested the Conservatives form a pact with Reform. The wheels are already coming off. Kemi Badenoch should sack Greg Smith from her front bench. Anything less would be an admission that the Conservative Party now wants to deal with Nigel Farage and Reform. Not holding their punches there. What do you think? Give it a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number. You can send me a voice note, WhatsApp on the same number, or if you want to send a text, 8722. Start your text with talk. Keep the debate going. Now, joining us is an astute political mind, Elliot Wilson, a commentator, writer, former House of Commons clerk, and general man about town. Elliot, I mean, should they sack poor old Greg Smith for that? Surely he's just stating the bleeding office, isn't he?
Well, I mean, I don't speak for the Conservative Party.
No, I don't suggest you do, but as a punter...
As somebody who cast their first vote for the Conservatives in Scotland in 1997, I've seen this sort of depth of despair before. I personally don't think there is any future in a kind of tie-up between the Conservatives and Reform UK, because Nigel Farage has said that his objective is to destroy the Conservative Party, and you don't cozy up to people who've said they want to destroy you. I don't know how Kemi Badenoch wants to play her sort of disciplinarian card. That's a matter for her. I see the kind of superficial attraction of you add together the votes that Reform UK got, the votes that the Conservative Party got at the last election, and you start to see some kind of right-wing coalition. I don't think it's that simple, for the simple reason that I don't think Reform UK is a real party. It's a pressure group.
It's a pressure group that's ahead in the polls, right? They're on 26, 27 in some polls, so more than a pressure group, surely.
One of the things that Reform UK has done very well, and this is largely down to Nigel Farage, who is a brilliant campaigner, I take nothing away from that, is that they've managed to say to pretty much anyone who is disaffected, come and vote for us. Which is why you're seeing people in Glasgow who would otherwise have voted for the SNP, in the northeast of England, where I grew up, who would otherwise have voted Labour, in bits of England who would normally have voted Conservative. They can all go to Reform UK because Farage has set up a tent for the disaffected. And it's getting beyond that level that I think is a real challenge, and that's where I think he and Reform UK may stumble.
And that's where they sort of, almost like the Liberal Democrats in pre-2010, they were a sort of protest party for protests for anyone, for any issue you like. And then as soon as they were tested and made to go into power, obviously the contradictions at the heart of that being sort of against everything, be it nuclear power, student fees, you name it, obviously came to the crunch when they got into power. When you look at the polls, though, I mean, lots of Tory MPs will tell you privately that they think that 121 seats they got in July last year, that they're not yet at the floor. They could yet go lower. If Kemi Badenoch had to sack every single person that suggested there should be a pact with Reform, she wouldn't have anyone left, though. Isn't it just inevitable that it's going to sort of hurtle towards that if the polls stay where they are?
That's not a decision I would make personally.
Yeah.
I think the idea of sacking everybody who says they're in favour of it is probably not the right way to go. I think There's space for a conversation about it. People can have very clear positions on it. As I say, if anyone were asking me, the Conservative Party, I'd say don't go anywhere near Reform UK. But, there are people who are clearly more comfortable with their positioning on the ideological spectrum. I think we are in a very uncertain time in politics that we've really never seen, certainly for the last 100 years, possibly ever in British politics, because we've traditionally had a very stable party structure.
Yeah.
The last big shift was when Labour replaced the Liberals in the 1920s. And it's not clear to me yet whether this is passing upheaval or a more structural shift underneath. And that, I suppose, we'll know over the next 10 years. But I understand anxieties, but I also think there's a degree to which you think, the Conservative Party are not yet a year from the worst election defeat they've ever had.
Yeah.
Don't make any rash decisions in the wake of that, I think would be my advice.
Reform are not yet a year from their breakthrough, and they're already down 20% of their representation. Admittedly, it's harder to keep discipline in a party of 5 than a party of 200, I'd argue, because obviously the divisions look a bit bad. But you're a constitutional expert. You had a front row seat in how power in this country works in your role as a House of Commons clerk. My view is that I don't think that the British system, I'm getting a bit deep here for 5:30 on a Thursday, but the British system isn't really ready for three-party politics. It doesn't work like that. The entire of Westminster, of Parliament, of the Commons is set up to be the government and the opposition. So how would you see it playing out if it did say there was, by hook or by crook, the polls broadly stayed where they are, Labour scraped back in with a reduced majority, and you've got two big blocks of reform, perhaps the Liberals as well, and the Tories on the other side. Does 3 or 4 party politics, would it work in the Westminster system?
It can work for a short amount of time. I think the difficulty with the polls is that when we look at opinion polls, we map them onto the size of the House of Commons and we think, right, there's your result. What we forget is that there are actually 650 individual races.
Yeah.
And, Reform might be a point away from winning one seat and nowhere ever going to win another seat. So it's never as simple as it seems. But you're quite right. The system we have is basically predicated on saying we like the government or we don't.
Yes.
If you don't like the government, there is a government in waiting to come in. And that's why, for example, the SDP never took off, because they couldn't break through the kind of institutional barriers. And it's why the Liberals and Labour were unable really to coexist for more than about 10 years in the 1920s, because ultimately one of them had to win. What was interesting about what Greg Smith was saying about proportional representation is, of course, Reform UK support proportional representation as well. So there is a potential. It's not something I would support, but people have
we only need to look across the channel to the continent to see how proportional representation goes. Either you have 18 parties trying to form a coalition in Belgium that takes 16 months before they can even start governing, or look what's happening in Germany, where you've got the hard left, the hard right, and everything in between on the march. So it's a tricky one. I wonder how long do you really think that will be reform policy in the next manifesto? I suspect they might quietly ditch that one.
They may ditch it if they think that it doesn't suit them, but at the moment it's obviously their best way to gain more support than they have in the House of Commons. I think the problem with proportional representation is you've got to accept coalitions. Yeah. That's an inevitable part of it.
I've noticed that Labour have gone a bit quiet on the old votes for 16 now. Now Reform are on 20% in the under 18s. Elliot, great to talk to you and pick your brains, your mind as ever. Thanks for joining us. Keep your calls coming in. 03444 999 1000. Nearly got it right there. 87222 on the text. Right, don't go away. After this, we will be joined by Brendan O'Neill, and I suspect he's gonna be spicy. It's 5:40.
We have a chancellor who thinks the way you stimulate growth is to simultaneously load £40 billion of taxes on business. You have to get to a point where you have zero emissions in net terms and simultaneously start to slash public spending. If you think that is how to stimulate growth, it's not Rachel from accounts, it's Rachel from the madhouse.
Yeah.
It's Rachel from the loony bin. This is not going to work.
Right.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Talk Drive. I'm Harry Cole of The Sun. We're having a great time. We're making news. We're having views. We're having everything. Let's take a caller. We've got Mark. Mark, where are you? Mark's in Bolton.
Yes, hiya, Harry.
How we doing?
Okay? Yeah, not bad.
What's on your mind, Mark?
Yeah, it's all this net zero madness. I think it's a complete con. I think it's a backdoor tax.
Yep.
And it's wishy-washy, and I think the government are drip feeding us garbage, basically. And all these scientific reports, if you ask anybody who's a supposed expert, they can't tell you, if I click my fingers now, net zero, what will be the difference? They can't tell you because they don't know, because I don't believe that there is such a thing. I don't believe in CO2.
You don't believe in CO2? I mean, CO2 is real, but I mean, you can have the argument about how much man-made it is, but I mean, CO2 is a thing. We breathe it out.
Yeah, sorry, CO2. Yeah.
No, I know what you mean. You don't believe it. You don't believe that man is behind this this phenomenon.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I got myself.
You don't know. Mark, I'm only teasing you. You don't sound like a man who's going to be getting a heat pump in an electric car anytime soon. Then.
No, because this 2030 thing. I mean, it could be another 300 years and still be using fossil fuels.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Mark, thanks for calling. Thank you for calling. Call in 03... Oh, I've messed it up again. 0344 499 1000 if you want to join Mark and have some fun. Or send me a text, 87222. Add the word talk. Oh, right, here we go. So the Lib Dems are nuts for calling for the Conservative MP to be sacked for stating anything other than the obvious about reform. That's what Stuart thinks. Now, from Stuart to Brendan O'Neill, a man I read regularly at Spiked, their chief political writer. Brendan, how are you?
I'm good, Harry. How you doing?
I'm having fun. You know, we've got a story, we've got a leaked document about the net zero. We're getting the texts are being nice about me. It's my second go on this show, and I'm having a great time. But a pleasure to see you. Net zero could crash the economy. The poorest will be hit hardest. It could wipe GDP off, send debt soaring. It's the sort of thing you've been saying for years, and yet here we have it now in black and white. Civil service admitting it. Can I get your reaction to that?
Yeah, I'm glad they finally come around to common sense. You know, net zero is a suicidal policy. It's a project of national suicide to sacrifice industry, infrastructure, economic growth, and pretty much everything else at the altar of this religious hysteria, this idea that we have to appease the gods of climate and sacrifice as much as possible so they don't get angry with us. There's something very medieval about this ideology, and I think it's very clear that it's going to hurt the poorest people in society and working class people by getting rid of loads of good jobs, getting rid of whatever manufacturing we have left, making it less likely that we'll open coal-fired stations or dig for oil or have nuclear power. This is all disastrous, and I think we need to prioritise growth rather than shrinking carbon emissions.
How would you prioritise growth, though? It doesn't seem the government being able to pull any lever yet. They're finally now realising, and I think hopefully realising, that getting out of the way might be a good start. Do you think it'll be do it in time? You've got Keir Starmer there giving speeches about abolishing quangos and regulators and red tape and unshackling enterprise. You buying it?
Isn't it interesting that Keir Starmer is now saying the kinds of things that you guys at The Sun have been saying for years and years?
Exactly.
Which you guys got a lot of flack for saying, not least from the Labour Party, that we need to cut red tape and we need to cut green tape and we need to strip out all these quangocracies and do something about the blob in Whitehall and so on, although he's not going far enough down that road for my life. He's finally realising, I think once you get into power in this country, you do finally twig that actually there's a lot of kind of quicksand style government infrastructure that just prevents you from moving forward, prevents you from doing what you want to do. And even Labour's fairly limited agenda is difficult to realise when you've got all this stuff up against you. So I think he's finally realising that. I think it's too late. And also, I just don't trust that the Labour Party, which is the party of the public sector and the bloated state
and the unions.
And the unions and the party that doesn't trust ordinary people. I don't think that's the party that's going to cut the state in the way that we need a government to
I do think you're right, though, that they could have spent the opposition thinking, oh, it'll all be fine because the public sector love us because we're basically our voters and we'll pay them off and give them nice pay rises. The civil service will come round because we're fluffy Labour, we're not those evil Tories. We can come in and just say we'll be nicer and say we'll do things and it'll just happen. And they're hitting the same problem that every administration comes in, be it Boris Johnson, David Cameron, Theresa May, whoever it is, Rishi Sunak, is that you've got all of these levers in front of you and they're made of chocolate. You pull them and nothing happens. I've got a little bit more sympathy, I think, than perhaps you do, in the fact that I genuinely think they actually do want to do stuff, they do want to change, and actually this is all born out of frustration and acceptance that they got that first 6 months badly wrong, talked the country into recession almost, as we discussed earlier in the show, and now actually they realise they've got to move very quickly if they have any chance of getting re-elected, and actually they accept that people like Dominic Cummings were right when they said, the complete Whitehall needs a complete rewiring. Easy for me to say.
Yeah, the civil service in this country is a disaster at the moment. I mean, they're not a civil service at all. The clue is in the name. You're supposed to be civil. You're supposed to be a neutral, objective body that just does the things that the electorate and the government of the day wants you to do. The civil service hasn't been doing that for quite some time, and they were even worse when the Tories were in power. Do you remember they said they were being bullied by Priti Patel because she asked them to do their jobs, and they tried to block Brexit and all the rest of it? They were real wreckers during the Tory administration, and it seems that some of that is happening with Labour as well. I don't disagree with you. I actually think that Labour, power is a real eye-opener, and once you get into Downing Street and you see the books and what's in the coffers and what's not in the coffers, it's probably a real a dose of cold water on the face. And I think Labour is realising they need to take action. You're absolutely right. When they first came into government, they were talking this country down. They kept going on about the economic black hole. They talked us into an even worse recession by discouraging businesses from coming here because we're apparently such an economic basket case. Yeah. I think they've now twigged that they need a much more positive pro-growth agenda.
Absolutely. And if they need it for the, you might not, we might not, listeners might not agree with what they want to do in their agendas, but all of that is reliant on investment and money and growth. They need the money to pay for it. Even in this net zero leaked report, the whole premise of this is that because of our anemic growth, because of our overburdened regulatory environment, the very investors that the net zero dream, the religion that you call it, requires to actually even have a chance of getting off the ground, because you can't just borrow the money and you can't just tax it because we've already taxed the country out of existence. They're going to put it off. So they kind of need to do the stuff that they've taxed everyone else for doing for years.
Yeah, exactly right. And, at the same time that they're realizing that we need to grow and we need to create more wealth rather than just redistributing whatever little we have left, they also need to, I think they need to challenge the apocalyptic worldview of the climate change lobby. No, I'm not a climate change denier, but I am an apocalypse denier. Yeah. I believe that billions of people will die in the next 20 years unless we shut down every factory in the north of England. That's poppycock. It's nonsense. That's religious, end of times religious hysteria. They need to challenge that. They need to have more confidence in the country. we are the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, which to my mind is the best thing humankind has done so far. We transformed the entire fortunes of humanity with the Industrial Revolution that started in this country. We should take more pride in how industrious we have been over the past couple of centuries and really try and push that spirit forward. As I say, though, whether Labour can do that, huge question mark.
Let's look at how the others doing. Obviously, Kemi Badenoch's come out and said this week that net zero isn't viable by 2050, and then obviously you've got Reform who've been saying that for a very long time. And then I don't know if you caught earlier in the show, we had Greg Smith, the Shadow Business Secretary, on, who said there should be a pact between, well, he all but said, in fact he pretty much said it, we're going to go with he said it, a pact between Reform and the Tories. The furthest anyone on the front bench has gone on that. I know you like to talk about the big issues and you're a big thinker, but the nitty-gritty, dirty politics of Britain, everyone can see that Greg's right.
Yes, I'm so worried about Reform at the moment, all that infighting they've got going on, and they're getting a lot of flack. And I think Nigel Farage is a brilliant politician. He's got so much going for him. He really connects with ordinary people. He could really do well in the next election. They did brilliantly in the last election, considering they're a relatively new party. I think, I guess the problem, looking forward to the next time we go to the polls, the problem is that if it's the Conservative versus Reform for the votes of sensible people or people who want a bit of change, then that will split that vote and it will weaken that vote, and it might mean that Labour gets in on another lacklustre.
Well, they got in with what, 33% of the vote last year. I mean, if you look at the polls now, with basically everyone bumping somewhere around between 24 and 27, and the Lib Dems down on 12, that's 10 years of Starmer right there.
Yes, so something needs to change. But, let's not forget that the Conservative Party, I think Kemi Badenoch's doing a good job. She was definitely my favourite choice for leader. I think she's got a lot in her, and we'll see how she performs over the next few years. But don't forget that the Conservative Party has got so many wets in it, as Thatcher famously called them, and so many Ramonas and so many dull people who would run a mile rather than rub shoulders with Nigel Farage. So it will be difficult for the Conservatives to make a link up with Reform. But something does need to happen. Otherwise, we could be a one-party state for the next 10 years.
I mean, if you look at how the Lib Dems and Labour played it last election, they never said there's a sort of pact between Labour and the Lib Dems, but there was very obviously some seats in the country where Labour pulled all their resources out and let the Lib Dems have a crack at the Tories, and the same where seats in the southeast, in the rural south of England, and nice fluffy clouds and green bits of England where suddenly the Tories were actually wiped out in their heartlands. It was clear that Labour were holding off and letting the Lib Dems have a crack on it. Can you see that maybe sort of non-aggression pact sort of shape rather than a formal deal? Would that not be the way to do it?
Yes, I can see that happening, and I can see that working, in fact. And, the thing is, there are so many people in this country, especially working class voters, who still haven't decided which party they're going to plumb for. I mean, for decades, they voted for the Labour Party, of course, until they realised that the Labour was continually stabbing them in the back. I think the real end point was when Labour tried to betray their vote for Brexit. And tried to overthrow the largest democratic vote in the history of this country, which millions of working people voted for. They were so disgusted by that they all went for Boris Johnson in 2019, which was essentially a second Brexit referendum. So those voters are still crying out for someone who has got sensible policies on the economy, sensible policies on culture and wokeness and all that idiocy we have to put up with, and sensible policies on borders and immigration. If there was a party that could go to those working class constituencies with good policies on all of those things, they would clean up in this country. So I think some non-aggression pact between parties that generally share those views would be a good thing.
Yeah, I totally agree that sort of Boris and Brexit were a gateway drug to millions of voters for looking at parties they'd never even considered voting before, for Labour voters across the country. So you could see how it worked, really, couldn't you? You could have the sort of Tories pulling off in what we used to call what was once called the Red Wall. Then there was, then it was sort of, it went blue, and now it's sort of back to Labour, but only with very slim majorities in large parts of it. So allow Reform to have a run at that, while the Tories try and claw back the shires off the Lib Dems. You can see how it works, right?
Yeah. You can, absolutely. And, you know, the Lib Dems have become... There's been so much political realignment over the past 10 years.
The voters are so fluid.
Yeah, the Lib Dems have become the party of the kind of leafy upper middle classes. They've stolen a lot of Tory seats on that front. Labour is now the party of the public sector workers, has been for some time, and also the kind of urban middle classes, the young and migrant voters. And Reform has the potential, and the Tories almost became the new working class party. I think they've fluffed it.
I think COVID blew that up.
Yeah,
personally.
COVID wrecked all of that. Poor Boris got COVID, you know, the whole COVID issue just months after getting into power. But I think, you know, there is room for a new party to come in and speak to working people, that's working class, lower middle class people who really graft for a living, and to really entice them into a new alignment. And if Reform and Tory can agree to do that in some way, they could really shake up this.
Well, it is fascinating to see Kemi Badenoch essentially moving the Tory party away from those wishy-washy Lib Dem sort of left-of-centre Tories, as you point out, to, you know, saying what sort of, you know, starting to slay some sacred cows like net zero, putting them into a position where Reform were. Just while I got your last question, Brett, do you feel in a way that, you know, Nigel Farage at the last election said there's something happening out there, and we had the Women's Matters spokesperson on earlier who was talking about sort of the trans issue backlashes, you know, the backlash to that is happening. You've got Reform ahead in the polls in a way you wouldn't think. You've got Donald Trump, you know, abolishing DEI and all of that woke stuff. You've got companies ditching the woke stuff. Britain seems to be lagging a bit, but is the great battle to save the West slowly being won?
It's definitely starting in earnest. That's what I would say. I think it's for the winning. And what Trump has done is extraordinary.
Yeah.
You know, he said, drill, baby, drill, get men out of women's sports, control the border, dismantle the bloated bureaucratic state, and let's make America rich and wealthy and happy and sensible again. And I think that's going to ripple effect around the Western world.
Gonna leave it there. Fascinating chat as ever. We'll be back after the news.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, Harry Cole here on Drive on Talk. And what a couple of hours we've had. We started out talking with net zero. We've ended up creating news about the Lib Dems, oh, not the Lib Dems, the Tories and reforms. The last thing the Lib Dems are doing in creating news, unless they are demanding that one of our guests on Talk Drive be sacked for what he said on the Home of Common Sense. How can that be possibly true? Greg Smith, he said that there should perhaps be a deal between the Reform and the Tories. He was on to talk about net zero. We're going to talk about net zero again in a minute, but the calls are coming in thick and fast. I want to hear what you think about all this. You can text 87222, start your message with Talk. Andy says, Harry, I'm glad the Lib Dems are listening to the Home of Common Sense. Andy in Cornwall, I couldn't agree with you more. Not only are they listening, they put out a press release. The Deputy Leader, Daisy Cooper, no less, says Kemi Badenoch should sack Greg Smith from her front bench. Anything else would be an admission that the Conservative Party now wants to do a deal with Farage. But what do you think? Should he be sacked? I don't believe you're going to think that, but you can call me 0344 499 1000. Keep those calls coming in. We are going to take a slight change of direction now, because we've got someone from, well, almost the government. I suspect he'll be in the government before too long, because he is what we call in newspaper land a rising star, which is either going to be a blessing for the career of Mike Tapp or a curse. But Mike Tapp, MP for Dover, thanks for joining us on Talk. How are you?
Thank you, Harry. That's very kind words. I'm intrigued by the...
Oh, wait, just wait. Hang on. I've got some statistics here you're not going to like.
That's fair enough. And I'm absolutely intrigued by the story before. We've seen Farage fawning over Putin, and now the Tories are fawning over Farage. Where's this going to go?
Well, look, I mean, you had a reform presence, a very significant presence in your seat. You won, but, Dover is kind of ripe for a reform country. Do you feel threatened in your seat in Dover by the prospect of a reform Tory coalition?
Well, I've got a healthy majority of 7,500. They rejected reform in my constituency. And look, my view here is that this is about what we stand for as a nation, and those British values that are so important: democracy, the rule of law, fairness, respect, decency, but also that firmness, which is really important. And that's what we've got from Labour, and that's why my constituents were happy to vote for me, given my military service too.
I'm going to talk about your project in a little while. We're going to talk about net zero in a little while. We can go back to talking about other parties.
Yeah.
But let's just have a little look. You are the MP for Dover, essentially the front line in the small boats crisis. There's no denying that. You stood on a platform in last election in July of smashing the gangs. The gangs haven't been smashed yet, have they? The boats, more people are arriving on boats now than under the last government.
So what we've got to appreciate here is we have inherited open borders in my constituency, 2,000
makes me extremely angry. 2,000 people have arrived in 9 days.
Right, so let's look at what we've done so far. So 14 years, open borders, 300 crossed in 2018, over 150,000 since, 84% of them on the Conservative watch.
27,923 Channel migrants have arrived since you've been in power.
We've set up a border security command.
But doesn't seem to be doing very much, does it?
I've been sitting on the committee for the bill, which will empower them with counter-terror powers. That's not in legislation yet. Once we have that, combined with the upstream relationships we've been building from France all the way to Iraq, we'll start getting on top of it. But also, Harry, I must stress, we've deported record numbers. That's 19,000, up 24%.
Some of those, but some of those are foreign criminals that would have been going anyway.
That's increased by 21% of foreign offenders.
In December, there were 8,000 more migrants in hotels on the taxpayer than there were in July. That is on your watch.
The trouble we have here, the Conservatives opened up 21,000 hotel spaces. We can't just close them down, but what we've done is we've got 1,000 more decision makers in the Home Office, which means we're speeding up the processing, which is why we've deported record numbers, and that will then, of course, see hotels closing in the future.
There's been an uptick in the last few weeks. You might coincide it with it being Fool's Spring, slightly sunnier.
Yeah.
There was a bit of chat around not long ago, back end of last year, where the Home Office believed that they had broken the link between sunny days and higher boat crossings. Obviously, when the sun is shining, the wind is down, it's not raining, the boats come. That doesn't seem to be the case, does it? Because we've had a few days of sunshine and that graph is going the wrong way for you guys.
So the data pre-Christmas, and apologies, I haven't seen it since, was that those viable days for crossing, the crossings were actually dropping. But what we've got to be doing here is focusing on how they're getting over, and that is the gangs. That's why we're going after them. That's why we bring MI5 in. That's why we're bringing counter-terror powers in. And, of course, the French.
Yeah, but are they doing enough? You're writing the checks, what, 500 million a year? Are they doing enough?
That relationship's improving. So what we're not seeing anymore...
That's a politician's answer.
What we're not seeing anymore, Harry, is Twitter diplomacy and bashing our closest neighbours who we need on the side.
Why bash them when you can write them a giant cheque? And one day they must love you guys.
We've had a vet out there speaking with the Minister for Interior, who has actually said that they're looking to change the laws around tackling small boats in shallow waters. We already got the Germans to change their laws around some of the smuggling of boats and things that can be used for crossing. Now the French are looking to do similar. So that influence upstream is really important.
Though, aren't they? Look, so we're paying them all this money, and we're paying them all this money to police the beaches. Yet other countries with with seaside access, say Holland, for example, or Belgium, Holland, are not. We're not getting boats from there, even though there's lots of migrants there trying to cross.
Belgium
what is
is
it
doing a good job as well.
uniquely about the French seem to be taking the mix? They're trying to shut us out of EU defence spending for British firms. We're paying them all this dosh. They're playing silly. I'm not going to swear. I always swear on the show. They're playing silly so-and-sos on when it comes to reopening Brexit talks for access to our fishing rights. The French are taking the mick, aren't they?
It's important that we work with them.
Yeah, but they're taking. They've got you guys over a barrel.
This is the beauty of diplomacy.
The beauty of diplomacy is writing a cheque.
I'm not going to come on here and insult. I know you'd love me to, Harry.
We can make new. We get the Lib Dems about another press release.
We need to work with the French, and I know Yvette Cooper, our fantastic Home Secretary, is working hard on that, and it will see results. I'm confident that this bill will. So let me just explain a little bit about the counter-terror laws and what they can do. Having worked in counter-terrorism, it means that we don't have to wait until we can charge, because often these complex, sophisticated gangs are tough to get that evidential picture. If we've got the intelligence picture, which we can't parallel with evidence, then we can still get to them with these powers and disrupt their activity, like we do terrorists.
But can we, if the French aren't willing to get their hands dirty on the beaches of Boulogne, then it's all kind of hypothetical.
At this point, the noises coming from France are positive. That talk of changing the law for tackling boats in shallow waters is really important. And
surely they're just holding out for a bigger cheque.
I very much doubt it, Harry.
I don't know. Now, look, you're an interesting chap. You've had a fascinating career before you came into Parliament. Tell us briefly about that. And why do you feel the need to make such a big deal about talking about British values, British democracy, and the love of your country? Why is that such a almost strange thing to sometimes hear a Labour MP say?
It's a funny one because I've felt it growing up. My dad was a copper. My granddad hunted Nazis in the Atlantic. My mum...
it says here, before becoming a Coleman's mustard salesman. You can't get more British.
The very best.
You cannot get more British than that.
He'd be. I'd love it if he was around now.
You're in the wrong party, aren't you?
Absolutely not.
No?
Look, British values align very closely with military values and Labour values, and that strength of decency and fairness and equality is really important for leading this country. And I think we've seen it from Keir Starmer on the global stage with his statesmanship and his diplomacy, trying to bring peace in Europe, that increase in defence spending, trying to fix the NHS, getting police more on the streets, ensuring that workers have rights, that renters have rights, building more housing so that we have places to live. All of this comes down to British values, and my view is that if you're on the extremities of our politics, those values start to fall down. We saw that with Militant, we saw it with Mosley, with the BNP, with UKIP, with Jeremy Corbyn, and now we're seeing it in some parts of our politics in Parliament.
Where's the British values? Where does it fall to? Paying a country £18 billion to take away part of Britain, as we're doing in the Chagos. Where's the British values in prosecuting former SAS soldiers for their role in the Troubles and eliminating Republican terrorists who wanted to destroy Tory Britain? Where's the Labour values in some of that?
The Chagos deal, the complexity around that is that actually having that secure base in that strategic
US based,
area,
isn't it?
Exactly. And
well, why don't they pay for it?
Our defence and military relationship with the Americans is important. Biden backed this. Trump's backed it.
Trump said he would look at it.
The Tories started these negotiations.
Yeah, but they didn't sign it, did they? David Cameron took one look at it and said, this is mental.
They were bringing it forward to sign it. Obviously, I can't speak for them, but they started it. It was good. As soon as we're in power and carry it on, it's suddenly a bad idea. Look, I was with Suella Braverman yesterday on another channel. Sorry,
it's all right.
Harry.
Other forms of talk are available in the day.
The former Home Secretary twice had loads of great ideas about immigration, stopping the boats and bringing net migration down. Why didn't she do it? And that's the same across the board with the Conservatives at the moment. They're out of ideas, and now they're fawning over Farage, who's fawning over Putin. It's all a bit worrying.
Do you think that Keir Starmer sort of gets this British value stuff? It's been really interesting. It's been really interesting to see when I've been writing about it in the last couple of weeks. He started out with the hike in defence spending. Nothing to that. Can't dispute with that. The slashing foreign aid, can't dispute that. His bonfire of the Quangos. His let's unleash potential and change. Is he and you just sort of saying this stuff because you can see reform breathing down your necks, and you think, oh crikey, we better wrap ourselves in the Union Jack and start speaking like a right winger?
No, I've been to war 3 times for this country, Harry. I mean it. It comes from the heart. It's within my very soul. Look, I didn't spend my time waving the flag before politics, by the way. I just served and did it, and now I'm serving. But I want people to know how much I love this country, how much Keir Starmer loves this country. He served before going into politics too, and that's why he's working so hard to defend the country, keep it safe from threats abroad, but also fix the economy here.
How do you sit on the same green benches as a load of peaceniks and Jeremy Corbyn supporters and people that want to scrap our nuclear deterrent and basically are attacking Israel day in, day out, and have some pretty warped ideas about Britain? And frankly, I mean, I'm not going to name them, but I think there are a few of them I'd say probably don't particularly like Britain that much.
Well, look,
how do you sit in the same party as them?
You can say very similar comments
I'm talking about your party there. You're saying your Mr. Patriotism, which is a completely commendable view. But how do you share a stage or share a PLP meeting with the crackpots?
If you look at the majority of the Labour Party, it's a moderate party now, and we are sitting in that centre-left, centre-ground, which is where British values belong. And I say to all MPs of any colour that you've got to love the country to serve it. That's at the very core. You can be angry about what's happened to the country, but it's that absolute patriotism that should drive us forward to fix the country and get it back to what it was under the last Labour government.
What is a country, hopefully not bankrupt, hopefully not at war any more than we already are, what does a patriotic Keir Starmer, Mike Tapp-inspired Labour Party look like in 3 or 4 years' time? Where are the benchmarks that you would want for this government to have achieved to be deserve re-election after, frankly, my words, not yours, but I know lots of your colleagues would agree, a pretty shaky first 6 months, bad start, talking the country down, nearly talked the country into recession, probably a better few months since Christmas, but that's because you've pivoted to, as you said, the centre ground.
There was some tough decisions to make when we first came into government after inheriting the black hole. Where I'd like to see us be, Harry, is a very good question. A military that's functional and ready to respond to the threats, and I can see us getting there, the defence spending being increased.
Really? In 3 years' time? It's barely going to kick in, is it?
Getting there. It does take time. It does take time. Also, fixing the NHS. I want people in this country to be able to see a doctor and to get treatment within 18 weeks so that people aren't dying when they shouldn't be. I want to see more police on the street so antisocial behaviour isn't as rife as it is, and we're working towards that. I want to see young people being able to afford a home, and of course we're putting legislation through to ensure we build more. I want renters to have rights, and I want to see immigration coming down, net migration and secure borders, at least making massive strides in that direction. Do you think you'll be able to do all that? You'll be able to do that in 3 years when your own Prime Minister stands up?
It's ambitious. And the own Prime Minister stands up and says that he can't get anything done, the civil service is going slow, and this country is wired up the wrong way for change.
It's ambitious, Harry, but if you love the country, you have to be ambitious, and the work around the civil service already, Wes has identified the issue and is starting to fix it. We need to see that across all departments, and I'm sure we will.
Kevin, I'm afraid Mike says Mike is living in cloud cuckoo land like most MPs on both sides. Kevin in Southampton, what's your response to Kevin?
Hello, Kevin. Lovely question. Look, I've only been an MP for 7 months. I spent my life in service. I've been to war 3 times. I worked for the National Crime Agency. I've taken on terrorists. I didn't suddenly become strange and out of touch when I became an MP. That all remains, and it's about service.
Mike Tapp, come and see us again soon. I know you're a good sport for this sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Do you believe, Mike, is Labour the future of patriotism in this country, or... Well, I'm sure the switchboard will light up on that one after Mike Tapp. It's 87222 for the text. Start your text with talk, or 83444991002. Call. Don't go away. Richard Tice is next.
Has it caused some turbulence? Of course. Has it on the edges caused some people to be disconcerted? Yes. Does it make a fundamental difference to what we're going to do on May the 1st? No. And does it make almost any difference in the country? Virtually none whatsoever. So, obviously members think, well, he was doing some good stuff, he was doing some good work, he was putting out some good tweets. Why is this happening to him?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, Harry Cole here on Talk Drive. Welcome back. Keep those phone calls coming in. 0344 499. Oh, no, I messed it up. I'm getting tired now. See, at the beginning of the show, I had it absolutely nailed down. 0344 499 1000. I'm going too quickly. Send me your calls on that number. Send me your voice notes on that number. Text me 87222. Start your message with Talk. Keep that going. This is a show that has created news today. The Lib Dems are furious with our previous guest, Greg Smith, who had the tenacity to call for a deal between Reform and the Tories. A little bit embarrassing for Kemi Badenoch, who won't be saying that publicly, given that Greg is the MP for Buckinghamshire, and she launched her local election campaign today in Buckinghamshire, with Greg standing next to her, grinning away, and then going, I'd say probably violently off message for the party line, right here on the home of common sense. And by hook or by crook, We have a man that can respond directly to that. Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform.
Very good afternoon, good evening.
I'm going to play you this clip of Greg, see what you think.
I think it's far too early to say what that looks like in detail, but I think there is going to come a point where the parties on the right of centre look at where things stand ahead of the 2029 general election, and if there is a risk of a continued Labour government, or possibly the worst case scenario, a Labour, Lib Dem, SNP coalition that would almost certainly bring in proportional representation or something like that, and really push the left dial very, very harshly, because let's face it, the Lib Dems are now positioning themselves to the left of Labour. The Orange Book tradition is well and truly dead. Then I think there has to be some sort of deal negotiated out. Exactly what that looks like, far too early to say.
Does your leader know that deep down? Obviously, she can't say it now publicly, but she must look at the same polls we're looking at, the same graphs. You add up Reform, you add up Tories, you've got more voters than Labour there. Without some form of deal, you're looking at another 5 years of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. She must know that.
Britain is not a left-wing country. What we're trying to do at the moment is ensure we've got a policy platform and an offer to the British people that has got to be radically different to the offer that they threw out so comprehensively last July that can get us a majority. We want to form a majority Conservative government. But we've got to look at the facts the closer we get to that general election to see how things are going, to see how the Turquoise team are doing compared to us, and take a judgment closer to the time.
Would you serve in a Nigel Farage administration?
It's far too early to say. I'm going all out for a Conservative win.
Richard Tice, I know it's not in the Conservatives' gift for do a deal, but they seem up for it, right?
Well, look, doesn't it show just how challenging things are for the Conservatives, that they're even talking about it, they're even considering it? Look back a few months. Look, it's another one of these things. We don't want many net zeros, but the truth is we want net zero deal with the Conservatives. I think that's a fair reflection. Competition's a great thing. And under first past the post, our plan is very clear. We've got the right policies, we're going to work hardest with the right candidates. We will win outright.
I mean, that's a big ask, given you've now got, well, you're down to 4.
But
you had 5 MPs.
You've got to be bullish in... You've got to be bullish
326 more to get for a majority, by my maths?
Yeah, but look, I mean, nobody thought we could get any MPs last July. No one thought we'd get 4 million votes. Look at the progress. No one thought back then that we'd be trading now, a poll out today, and we're 5% ahead of Labour, trailing ahead of the Conservative Party. Realistically, we're in the lead.
I know, but realistically, if you plug those numbers into the supercomputer that will generate an election result in this country, that's letting Labour back in by the back door, isn't it? The way the vote is spread.
But we're only just starting. We've got 4 years, and regrettably, we've got some economic very hard times. We've got an emergency budget coming next week, more tax rises, more wasteful government spending, going on and on and on. And I think people very quickly will see that this government is bankrupting Britain. And as they do, they say, well, hang on, so you've had the Tories broke Britain, this lot are bankrupted the place. We now need some new smart people coming in and sorting the job out, and that's what we're going to do.
We're going to talk about net zero in a moment, because I know we've been talking about it all day, me and you, but an issue dear to both of our hearts on the back of that story, which we've been talking about all afternoon. I've got some breaking news here. A statement from the Labour Party now on Greg Smith's comments. Poor Greg, when he came on this show, I had to talk about net zero. I'm not sure he thought he was going to be launching this political firestorm that he has, but the Labour Party have issued the following statement. Kemi Badenoch's Tory top team are plotting a shady backroom deal with Reform. Nigel Farage plans to dismantle the NHS, meaning you'll pay thousands for routine healthcare. Just imagine what they'd do together. Don't risk the coalition of chaos. Richard Tice, your response to the Labour Party?
Well, again, another party that's terrified of our progress. In fact, in Scotland, Labour are now talking themselves about a dodgy deal with the SNP, what I call a coalition of the terrified. But the reality is, we are doing extremely well. And as for that nonsense about the NHS, they keep peddling this garbage. I literally stood in the chamber and reminded the health secretary...
Nigel has previously suggested that
what Nigel said, what we've always said is, we've got to be prepared to look at how other countries do things and learn lessons. I was just literally in the chamber talking about more face-to-face GP appointments. But I reaffirmed earlier this week, free at the point of delivery should always be the way. But last election, the health secretary said we need to use the independent sector more in order to reduce waiting lists. He literally took that straight from the Reform contract.
So you say reform are surging ahead. You point to the polls that you are ahead. You say you're on the march and could win the next election. Just briefly before we move on, obviously the last couple of weeks have been dominated by Rupert Lowe. I'm getting tired now. Rupert Lowe. We got new claims tonight that Nigel said it was incredibly, all his comments that he made to a rival newspaper that wasn't The Sun, but kicked off all of this row about whether Nigel could be the Prime Minister or should be the Prime Minister in his leadership style, and leaked messages where Nigel appears to suggest that this was incredibly damaging. You guys get on the blower to the police, and 3 months after an alleged incident, and report this guy to the cops. Are you at threat? Are you at risk of just at that point of breakthrough, slipping back into the old UKIP Brexit Party infighting ways?
Far from it, actually. Far from it.
I thought you said something else, and I was about to press the dump button. But
you have bumps in the road, but
that's a pretty big bump to lose a fifth of your representation.
We have bumps in the road, but the reality is that when people are answering to polls this week, it turns out that actually this makes no difference at all. In a number of polls, we've gone up. Why? Because people recognise that we're going to stick to our guns. We've got the right policies. The country's in real trouble. People want something fresh, and we've got elections just round the corner. We've got elections just around the corner. We're going to do remarkably well. Look,
on the eve of those elections, is going to the cops to report one of your own MPs for shouty words. I mean, that's the sort of snowflake stuff that you guys rail against, isn't it?
Well, let's see what the investigation throws up.
What did he say to Zia? What did he say to Zia?
Let's see what the investigation... I'm not going to... We've got an independent investigation going on. We'll see what that says. But we are pushing on. And here's the point. You win elections by being a united team. And that's what we're going to be. And we're convinced that we are going to have a fantastic set of elections. We're going to hopefully win some mayoralties. And then we're looking forward to the devolved nation elections next May 26th.
Your mate Rupert Lowe is he's just tweeted, or he's just X'd, as we have to call it now. The only reason he was Nigel Farage has personally admitted now the reason he removed me from Reform was because I raised reasonable constructive criticisms about reform, structure, policy and communication. Is that fair?
No, it's completely unfair. It's ridiculous. I mean, the fact that...
You've had your problems.
The fact that we've got
a
full manifesto from the last election that Keir Starmer is now copying. He's copied us on defence spending.
Yep.
He's copied us on foreign aid. He's copied us on cutting government waste. He's copied us on getting rid of abuse in welfare. I mean, basically, Keir Starmer's sort of becoming a reformer because he's so terrified of our progress. I mean, we're happy to teach him and educate him.
Let's talk about this. The leaked document that is set fire to years of mistruths, cover-ups, and government spin. Essentially, it's here in black and white. You raised it in the House of Commons today. The cost of net zero is less growth, higher debt, higher inflation, a possible economic crash, and the poorest in society, your constituents, my readers, our listeners, paying the price.
I mean, it's just appalling. And this document, I think, was at the back end of 2023, under the previous administration.
They sat on it.
And far worse than that, they suppressed it. They should have done a massive U-turn on the back of that document. That document is absolute bombshell. It destroys all of the nonsense, the misinformation, the garbage that we're told about net zero. It's not going to create more jobs. It's going to destroy growth. It's going to increase national debt. It's going to increase the risk of a financial crisis, and it's the poorest who suffer the most, who disproportionately. It's an outrage. On that document alone, you should scrap net zero, another fine reform policy.
Well, let's see when you put it to Lucy Powell, the leader of the House of Commons, in the earlier today. Let's look at her response. It wasn't brilliant, shall we say?
We cannot ignore net zero. It's not just important for the climate, but it's absolutely critical to lowering jobs. Lowering bills, creating jobs, creating the energy security that we need, and.
Well, you were there.
We were just roaring with laughter as she admitted it's going to lower jobs and decrease the number of jobs, and that's what it's doing. It's destroying jobs in the steel, the car industry. The cat was out the bag.
The cat's out the bag. This is the level of cabinet ministers that you're dealing with, and you're going to sit there potentially and let them back in, split the right-wing vote in this country in another 5 years.
We're going to eject them from their position.
How though? You actually can do that. You can't even keep. You can't, as the Prime Minister said at PMQs yesterday, you can't even keep your MPs in one taxi.
He can't even answer the question when he was asked a very sensible question by the ever-sensible Lee Anderson, who wants some sensible answers.
We should get him on. We should get him on this show one weekend. weekend, 1 week. Look, you can see the point, though. This drumbeat is just going to keep coming back to, you can't split the vote on the right. Time to unite the right.
Yeah, but you're assuming...
The success that you had in Boris Johnson, admittedly got that big majority. The last time that the right in this country got a majority, we can argue about what he did wrong after that and what he got, and how he wasted it. But the only way that happened is because the Brexit Party pulled off in Tory seats.
But there's a fundamental flaw in your assumption. You're assuming that the Conservative Party is of the right. I mean, I call them consocialists.
Yeah.
I mean, they're Lib Dems in a different colour. That's really what many of them are. And we've just got to put forward the policies that are going to make people better off. We're going to keep banging that drum. And on all this stuff, it turns out we seem to be right time and time again.
So you're pleased to see Kemi come round on net zero?
Yes, I mean, she started. But then the reality is, she voted for this nonsense time after time, year after year, which just proves all they're interested in is power, not principle. And when you actually look at her words, she said she still believes in net zero, but she just doesn't like the timing. We don't believe in it at all. It's an outrage. It's ruining the finances of this country, and it's got to stop.
Richard Tice, final question before I go. Rupert Lowe, will he be ever welcomed back into the reform fold?
Let's wait and see what the investigations
what politicians
say.
answer. You're not meant to. People don't like those politicians' answers, hiding behind reports.
I've been brutally honest and clear with you. I mean, look, we're pushing on. We're going up in the polls. Let's see what happens. I can't predict every event in the future.
So you're leaving the door open to a possible return. See, if you want to play if you want to do the politicians' game, I'll do the journalist game.
Absolutely, and you're brilliant at it. Look, we're pushing on. Who knows? But what I can say is, with regard to a deal in the Tories, that's the net zero we believe in. Zero deal.
Zero Tories, zero, maybe not quite zero Rupert Lowe. Well, we'll see. I think we're on the same page there. Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform, thank you for joining us on Talk, the Home of Common Sense, on Drive with me, Harry Cole. We'll be back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Drive on Talk with me, Harry Cole, from The Sun. It's been a lively few hours, but once again, let's take it on a handbrake turn in an entirely different direction. We've covered net zero, we've covered reform, we've even got the Lib Dems involved. In some fever dream, I remember there being a Green Baroness on the show. But let's look at what's going on in America. Obviously, Keir Starmer gave his speech last week about deregulating Britain and cutting back the state. Next week, we're going to have the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, taking a pretty hefty axe, or well, maybe a very large scalpel, to the size of Whitehall, to government departments, to quangos, waste and the war on waste is a bit of a buzzword. But that buzzword really started with Elon Musk and his cohorts who set up Doge. And one of the people that was intimately involved in that process early on was a gentleman called James Fishback, who joins us now. He's the CEO of Azora, which is an investment firm, a key power broker in Doge. James, how's it going? And do you think something like that could work in Britain? Is it time for Britain to Doge up?
Well, it's going well. Doge is uncovering waste, fraud, abuse, inefficiencies all over the government, from USAID to the Department of Education. And yes, it's time for Britain and for any country in the West to reclaim control, to tell the taxpayers we're going to do right by you once again, and to actually put their interest first. Government efficiency is a precondition for prosperity.
I mean, we've been, well, I'm a tabloid journalist who been writing about government waste and the wacky stuff we've been spending money on for years, you know, on sort of, you know, the British aid budget being used to fund pottery classes in Colombian jails, funding Bangladeshi prawn surveys about the sort of importance of shellfish in Southeast Asia. You know, I could throw a dart and hit no small amount of wasteful spending in sort of, you know, frittered away with things like aid. But is this not more about really restructuring how the actual government and procurement works, and abolishing whole departments like the Department for Education? I think Trump is going to announce that he is abolishing tonight, rather than simply tinkering around the edges and salami slicing, you know, cuts off the top.
That's exactly right, Harry. You know, the people, when we voted in November for President Trump, when we gave him a historic mandate, we didn't vote for minor government reform or mere tinkering around the edges. We voted for major government reform. And so when you get rid of the Department of Education, yes, you save $30 billion a year. But more important than that, you take away this toxic virus that has been holding back teachers, holding back parents, holding back students. Not a single academic outcome has improved since the Department of Education launched more than 40 years ago. And so, yes, we're going to save money. Yes, we're going to make the government more efficient, but we're also going to improve outcomes for Americans all across this country. And so, again, government efficiency isn't just about dollars and cents and narrowing the deficit and creating an environment for efficiency. It's also about delivering better outcomes for the people. And again, we're less than 60 days in to the Trump second term, and we're already seeing that great success, and it's only going to continue from here.
It takes time for people to feel different, you know, feel and notice changes like that. Here we have the hard left, the BBC, the Guardian. We used to be the Labour Party, but now they're the ones in power actually trying to do the cutting, screaming at every single possible tweak or change or sort of reduction of budget across the public sector, across the state. I'm sure you guys have similar sort of noisemakers on your left but sort of the political debate around cutting and reducing the size of the state and a small state has, I think, been poisoned on both sides of the pond. Obviously, the American state is far smaller. You guys like to think that ours is pretty overbearing, and not least in healthcare and education. But how do you take the public with you on that? And how do you make the sort of, not necessarily the moral case, but the justified case in the fact that it's going to take time for the results to be felt, and in the meantime, you've got this wall of noise from critics, basically howling, saying you're evil fascists?
Yes, the critics like Jasmine Crash Out Crockett and Maxwell Frost and AOC screaming from the bleachers about how USAID is no longer going to send money to a transgender opera in Colombia. It all sounds very familiar. Very familiar to what you guys might come across in the UK. But I got to tell you the truth, Harry. Most Americans are with us on this mission. A poll from JL Partners last month found that nearly 7 out of 10 Americans believe that their tax dollars are not being used wisely. What I think is really impressive about what Elon is doing is if you go to doge.gov right now, you see the total amount of money being saved, but you see it framed in a way that everyone can understand. So that headline number of 110 billion. But then what that means per taxpayer, as we speak, about $700 is being saved per taxpayer with the Doge savings. So that's real. That's real money. And so that's why we've called it Azoria for this Doge dividend proposal to take 20%, Harry, of that money and send it right back to the hardworking taxpayers who sent it to DC in the first place. They didn't send it to be spent on a DEI musical in Ireland or on a transgender opera in Colombia. They used it, they sent it, they worked hard for it to be spent here in America. And our roads and bridges are crumbling. Veteran health care is in disarray. Education is an absolute mess. And so the Doge dividend, to answer your question, how do we get the public on board? We have to deliver transparency. Doge.gov is doing that, framing it in terms of taxpayers' savings. But also when we identify and save that waste, we have to then send some portion of that to the hardworking folks who sent it to DC in the first place.
So a sort of Trump check style mail out to every taxpayer with a little rebate. I mean, I can imagine it being very popular, but wouldn't it be better spent, tackling your massive national debt?
Well, you can do both. I mean, you can absolutely do both. Our proposal calls for 80% of those savings to go to narrowing the deficit and paying down the national debt. But you talk about debt. The national debt isn't the only debt figure in the country. Households took on 30% more debt under the Biden-Harris years just to keep up with inflation. And they're borrowing not at 3 or 4% like our government is. They're borrowing at 15 and 20%. And so when you force households through inflation to take on more and more debt, you ought to send some rebate of those savings to them so they can reshore their finances. And for the first time in years, actually breathe above water. That's what this plan is really about.
I don't know how closely you follow the things across the pond, but do you believe the British state when they say that they can trim all of this fat in a similar way?
I believe they can, but they've got to kind of put the earplugs in while they're doing it, because you're going to have some very interesting backbenchers yelling about it on all sides. Look, I'll tell you, there's a lot of Republicans here in America who are oftentimes complaining about some of these cuts. These cuts are not to the detriment of the left and the right. They're to the detriment of the Fred fraudsters and the Stan swindlers in DC and in the neighboring communities who have used the taxpayer, have exploited the taxpayer for too long, and that ends now. Government efficiency is not about left versus right, Harry. It's about right versus wrong. It is wrong to abuse and misuse taxpayer funds, and Doge is righting this wrong, and I couldn't be prouder of President Trump and Elon Musk for their leadership.
I was just going to say, those two are big characters, though. The history is littered with people who've worked closely with Donald Trump and then fallen out with him quite spectacularly. Can you see those two holding it together? Is the first buddy going to still be the first buddy this time next year?
They have so much in common. They are working so hard. And the one thing that unites them is they've put it all on the line for their country. President Trump didn't have to do this. Elon Musk didn't have to do this. To great personal financial pain, they have stepped into the arena to fight for the common man and woman of this country. And we should be proud and applaud these men every single day for waking up and putting America first.
James Fishback, when you're done in the States, I've got some Colombian poetry workshops to show you. I think we could do some business. Thanks for joining us on Drive. James Fishback there. Some text coming in. What an utter shame. Tyson, Lowe and Farage could not hold it together. I suspect that's probably the view from, well, that's a view from Glyn, but a view shared by many a reform supporter. 87222 on the text. Start your text with talk. There's probably still some time to get some calls in before the end of the show. 03444 991 1000. But it's time now for a break. But before we go to the break, it's time to find out how you could be in the chance of winning Oasis tickets at Wembley this summer.
How do you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion.
Here's the thing, he says, Farage is incapable of saving the UK. In office, he would do massive damage. We love our country. We'll fight on. Are you incapable of saving the UK, and would you do massive damage in office?
Is this the same Ben Habib who lost election after election? Is this the same Ben Habib who, when he was deputy leader of the party, failed to get any of the candidates vetted, which caused us such problems at the general election, and failed to get us to stand in more than 12% of seats last year? Is that the same fella?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Talk Drive with me, Harry Cole from The Sun. We're in the final furlong now. I can taste the cold, ice-cold vodka martini I'm going to be drinking in about 14 minutes' time at this rate. We've had a hell of a 3 hours, though. We have committed news. We've had a great debate. Had some good calls. The texts are coming in. You haven't been rude about me yet. So I mean, you are a lovely, lovely crowd. And we've got the press releases are coming in thick and fast. The Liberal Democrats calling for one of our guests to be sacked. Labour calling it a coalition of chaos. Richard Tice here moments ago giving a big old hint that Rupert Lowe, the grassroots darling, the housewife's favourite of reform, will be perhaps invited back to join the party so they can fit back once again in a minicab rather than a black cab rather than a minicab. I don't know, I'm losing it now. I'm losing it. But it's my favourite part of this show, favourite part of the week, where I get to see the man I don't get to see very often because I normally just speak to him on the phone. Alex Goss.
Very pleased to be here.
News editor extraordinaire, executive editor, head of news at The Sun newspaper, where I mean, presumably there's going to be a story about Rupert Lowe and reform and the pact and poor old Greg Smith, who I hope doesn't get fired just for coming on this show. We'll be in there. We've got more net zero in The Sun tomorrow. But, Alex, what's in the paper?
Well done for committing some belters up here. That's
Thank you very much.
Always
very
happy and appreciated downstairs. But we've just broken a great exclusive online. Baroness Karen Brady.
Yes. The Apprentice star,
absolutely,
football West magnet,
yeah, absolutely. She was targeted by a thief 4 times in just 16 hours at their Belgravia mansion.
The same thief, or
the same thief? And essentially, although while the total amount stolen, £2,500, may not be huge in general terms, the two shocking elements for me would be, one, it just shows that the Amazon porch pirate phenomenon is in even the most affluent parts of London. But two, if her victim impact statement is really genuinely very moving. She talks about being targeted, watched and exploited, and obviously, despite the repeated thefts, the man targeting her in this way, he got a suspended sentence.
Of course he did. Well, you can't send him to prison anymore. That's that doesn't happen. That is absurd. And this is Belgravia. This is central London, probably the most expensive bit of real estate in the country, if not possibly the west of Europe. If this is what crime is like in the poshest bit of Britain,
and also
imagine what it's like in the.
He received a community order for another burglary prior to this case coming back for sentence, and the judge said to him, "I'm giving you, one last chance. If it had gone to trial, I'd have jailed you for 2 years for this." And yet he does get this final chance.
Unbelievable.
But it just shows you that people at every level in every area, these level of thefts do cause real harm and distress to people.
Stole cycling tops, handbags, Amazon parcels, striking 4 times. So was she? She was away.
She was away at the time, exactly that, and he obviously realised it. He went back once, found a couple of parcels, then continued on his raiding spree. Went back 4 times. The one time he went back wearing one of the stolen tops he had.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
So
I mean, literally taking the... I'm not allowed to swear, otherwise I have to press this button here. That crashes the whole show, so I'm not going to do that. I've managed to get through 3 hours of radio without swearing, so I'm not going to fall at the final hurlong, I promise. Now, look, bit of good news. We like to do, the paper likes to do light, dark, light and shade. And this is an actual story in The Sun about the Sun.
Well, why not?
Absolutely.
Everyone, you wouldn't have seen it trapped in here, of course.
Well, I had the window open earlier, so...
it's a stunning day.
Morning this morning.
The pub gardens of London are rammed.
It's nearly rosé season.
Nearly rosé season.
Not till Easter, I'd say, rosé season.
Well, you can fire the cork on that now, I'd argue. I think many people were downstairs, to be fair. Beautiful 21 degrees.
21 degrees. So last week, I was at Cheltenham. I haven't even mentioned that. I haven't really mentioned that yet. And it was snowing. It was snowing.
Crazy British weather.
There was snow and then hail and then 21 degrees today.
There is still no better British topic, as we know.
Absolutely. Paul Sims, of course, is... regular readers will know that is the sun weather man himself. Is it going to... So we were hotter than Athens, hotter than Benidorm, where lots of other people watched Cheltenham, hotter than Corfu.
Yeah.
Is it going to last?
That I'll refer to his 3-day forecast. Hopefully it stretches into the weekend.
The weather.
Yeah, exactly.
But Beachgoers enjoyed a game of volleyball in Brighton. There we go.
That. Yeah, you can have no
all right, then back to we've had the dark, we've had the shade, and now back to the dark. Is it?
Well, I'd say. Well, look, it's just the echo, the spring of discontent that appears to be emerging in Birmingham. You know, at the union, obviously they've been walked out for over a month now in this dispute with bin collectors.
I am shocked.
But you've got this situation now where a bin lorry's finally turned up at a road. Residents are so desperate to get rid of their refuse. Cars start arriving from across the area. They're pursuing the bin guys. Cops have to be called.
Back to the 70s, isn't it?
Yeah, very depressing
Rubbish laying uncollected in the streets. But also, I mean, the local election's coming up in beginning of May.
Yeah.
No hotter topic than bins.
No, exactly.
And they can't even get the bin workers back. So this is Birmingham piling up.
A Labour-run city council. There's no sign of the dispute ending on the horizon at the moment. All they're getting is their cycling collected.
Big pay rise.
They claim they're suffering pay cuts up to £8,000 due to 150 workers' roles changing. But ultimately, it's left the poor council taxpayer, with chaos.
Well, and council tax bill going up. It was a story by Noah Hoffman in tomorrow's Sun. You can read about that and get very angry. I suspect there'll be some phone calls about that on Talk tomorrow. So hang on, let me get this straight. The bin collections are so scarce. When they got wind of a bin...
They thought it was a mirage, this bin lorry driving down...
stuff. It's like when the aid truck arrives and you see them chasing... And this is in the streets of Birmingham.
It was being swabbed by people coming locally to get rid... Finally, desperately trying to get rid of their black bin bags. And, of course, that's not to mention the rats, the fire risk. West Midlands Fire Service have pointed that out from rubbish fires. Labour's written. Now, look, Alex, I knew you're not going to tell us what's on the front page tomorrow. You got a banger? You got a belter? I would strongly suggest we have. I wouldn't want to tip off my rivals, but it's a great story. You're going to have to buy The Sun tomorrow. What's your favourite story? Well, how Trump, has he been up to much today? Relatively quiet by Trump standards, I have to say. So that's a good thing. But he's obviously still the most newsworthy president of all time. How is that doing, though? People, our readers, are they up for it? Are they not? Like, are they saying, who's this crazy guy? Or are they quite like what he's doing? Look, no one engages more than he does on both sides of the spectrum. We get calls from everybody, and it lights the blue touch paper from whatever he does. And he has as many supporters amongst our readers as he may do. Well, I have to say the texts and the calls have been pretty pro-Trump actually to date, as they are. Alice Goss, better get downstairs, stay there, don't go away for a second though, because another former Sun man has just walked in. It's a Sun convention. It's the Sun has gone home. 21 degrees. I was on the Sun before you were even born, I think. Kevin O'Sullivan is here. He will be taking over in this very seat, in the hot seat. We've got a very important exclusive tonight. A very important exclusive. No, we have. Is it bin related? It is a shocking story of a military veteran. Oh dear. He's lost his job. He's fighting to save his marriage. His life is shattered because he was wrongly accused of Islamophobia. It's an example of two-tier Britain last, the madness that has consumed this country. He's done nothing wrong. We've got a very moving interview with this guy, and it is a story that I think will shock our audience. I think it's a story of modern Britain. It really is. And what else got coming up? Also, tonight is called Dr. Renee. Dr. Renee. Oh, of course, yes. Hunderkamp comes into the studio to answer everybody's medical questions. Alex, you got any questions for Dr. Renee? Anything wrong with you, aren't you? If I list everything that's wrong with me, we'll be here till about 11 p.m, I think. Also, we're going to get into the story that you broke. Brilliant story about net zero madness. Yeah, well, that's been driving everyone around the bend today. Really here it is. Here is the leaked report. I'm going to wave it one more time. In fact, you can have it. Thank you very much, Harry. There we go. There it is. Right from the horse's mouth. I feel honoured. I feel honoured. That is it. The report they sat on for 3 years, hoping that no one would notice, until a concerned citizen, as so often in our game, someone thought they were taking the mickey and have landed
that onto...
It's always the way.
Always.
And also, everything in this is so obvious.
We've been saying it. The Sun's been saying it. Talk's been saying it. You've been saying it.
Why do politicians willfully ignore, or they will themselves not to even digest
All I've got to say is 0207 782 4100. Give me a ring.
Look at that. No.
034444991.
This is basically now my hell of having... Anyway, I've got one more exclusive to report. I saw a Mike Graham bumper sticker in the wild in South East London. If you haven't got yours yet, what are you doing? But...
Have you got yours?
I haven't got mine yet. No one's given me one, but I clocked it. I tried to take a picture, but I was driving.
I'll get you one, but you have to give me some money.
I know a guy.
I know Mike Graham, so I'll get you one.